Good morning, everyone. If you could take your seats and we'll get started. If everyone could please stand as Chief Gordon will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance.
And standing for a moment of silence to honor Officer Tuan Lay of the Oakland Police Department. Officer Lay was shot and killed while responding to a burglary in Oakland last December. Thank you. Please take your seats. Somebody get Toby some water.
Yeah, okay.
Mr. Knapp, would you please call the roll?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. Thank you for being here. Commissioner Barcelona,
Here.
Commissioner Braun,
Here.
Commissioner Commissioner Cooper, Commissioner Yule, Commissioner Gordon,
Here.
Chair Long,
Here.
Commissioner Lopez,
Here.
Commissioner Moon,
Here.
Commissioner Nieto,
Here.
and Commissioner Rodriguez.
Here.
Thank you.
I would now like to introduce our advisory committee chair, Visalia Police Chief Jason Salazar, two to my right. And our post chief counsel, William Toby Darden. And on my immediate right, our executive director, Manny Alvarez. We'll open with public comment. This is the time set aside for members of the public to comment on items on the commission agenda or issues under the commission's jurisdiction. Public comment on peace officer revocation cases before us today will be taken at the time of the hearing of each case. Pursuant to commission policy, the commission chair will manage the public comment period in deference to the commission's workload and time constraints. Up to 15 minutes is allotted at the beginning of each commission meeting for public comment. Members of the public who wish to speak are asked to limit their remarks to no more than 5 minutes. If many people wish to speak on the same topic, I may ask that you limit remarks. Pursuant to commission policy, the chair may conclude the public comment period if multiple speakers are voicing repetitive statements, and the 15-minute public comment period has expired. And please be advised that the commission cannot take action on items that are not on the agenda today. Also, please remember that this meeting is being transcribed, so I may ask you to speak slowly and clearly so your comments may be accurately transcribed. Is there anyone present who would like to address the commission? Welcome. Come forward, please. Give us your name and organization, although many of us know it, and we'll begin.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ronaldo Villada. I am the Executive Director of Hoops for Justice, and I am the co-chair of the Post Subcommittee on the Racial and Identity Profiling Advisory Board. Honorable members of the Post Commission, as co-chair of the Post Committee on the Racial and Identity Profiling Advisory Board, I stand before you today to discuss the critical findings and recommendations detailed in our 2024 report. This communication, underscored by the cover letter sent by our co-chair, Andrea Guerrero, on January 3rd, 2024, reflects our collective dedication to improving law enforcement practices with the ultimate goal of eradicating racial and identity profiling. Over the past 7 years, our board has meticulously reviewed the majority of racial and identity training courses offered through Post. Despite these efforts, data from 2018 through 2022 reveals persistent disparities in the treatment of individuals perceived by officers as Black, Hispanic, and transgender, particularly during traffic stops. These findings prompted a reflective pause among our members, leading to a critical question: what fundamental elements are missing or need reinforcement across all training courses? In response, our 2024 report proposes 5 strategic recommendations aimed at strengthening the post framework to address and eliminate racial and identity profiling. Number 1, collaboration on guidelines. We recommend that POST collaborates with our board to develop and adopt independent guidelines for racial and identity profiling training. These guidelines should stand separate from the curriculum, establishing a foundational ethos for all courses. Number 2, timeline integration. The integration of a review timeline by both our board and community members will ensure that these guidelines and training curriculums are regularly evaluated and updated to reflect the evolving nature of law enforcement and community relations. Number 3, community and stakeholder input. Engaging community members and stakeholders early in the course development process and incorporating their feedback is crucial. This proactive approach will ensure that training materials are not only relevant, but also resonate with the realities and needs of the community served. Number 4, evaluative mechanisms. We urge POST to implement mechanisms that evaluate the effectiveness of all courses related to racial and identity profiling. Utilizing RIPA data as a primary measure will provide tangible benchmarks for assessing progress and areas for improvement. Number 5, accountability and responsibility. It is imperative that training emphasizes the accountability of officers for discriminatory practices and underscores the responsibility of supervisors in enforcing these standards. We are encouraged by POST Executive Director Manny Alvarez's advisory at the August 30th, 2023 subcommittee meeting, indicating POST's agreement with our recommendation to develop separate guidelines for all POST-certified racial and identity-related training courses. This collaboration is a significant step forward, and we are eager to engage in this critical work together. In conclusion, as we did for the 2023 report, we anticipate written responses to the recommendations laid out in our 2024 report. Such dialogue is essential for mutual understanding and the effective implementation of these strategies. Together, we have a monumental opportunity to lead change, foster trust within our communities, and ensure that law enforcement officers are equipped with the knowledge and skills to serve with fairness and dignity. Thank you for your attention and commitment to this vital cause.
Thank you much, Mr. Villeda. Are there any questions or comments on the presentation? None at this time. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for going over your recommendations. I urge everyone to take a good look at them and take a good look at the report, and I'm heartened by the positive words of cooperation, and hope we'll continue along that path.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. At this time, Executive Director Manny Alvarez would like to address the commission. I didn't see, are there other public comments? I didn't see any hands or nodding, so I shouldn't assume. Seeing none, Executive Director Alvarez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, commissioners and members in attendance today, or participants in the meeting. I appreciate, again, the offer to allow me to speak this morning. So I just wanted to give you an update on some significant items that we've either pushed out or will be pushing out in the very near future. And really, before I even start, because I don't want to forget this, I just want to thank Captain Zine. I don't know if Captain Chris Zine is in the room, and the LAPD for hosting us today. They've kind of gone out of their way to give us their facility for the meeting. So thank you, Captain Zine, who's in the back of the room. Thank you. So first of all, we pushed out a bulletin on cannabis use just a couple of months ago, and pursuant to legislation which limits questions that can be asked about cannabis use by peace officer candidates. It's an important bulletin. For those of you that are interested, it's Bulletin 2023-67. It places some very strict limitations on what can be asked and how testing can be conducted for cannabis use or not conducted for cannabis use. We also pushed out another bulletin on background investigations, and that bulletin essentially states that if a department uses a third-party vendor, a PI, or a third-party company to conduct the background investigation, that background investigation may very likely be available to the individual candidate and may have to be disclosed. It's a significant bulletin in that a lot of the background investigations that are being done across the state are being done by third-party entities. It does not apply when a department conducts a background or a retired annuitant for a department, as long as the individual is considered an employee of the department. That bulletin is 2024-08. As you're going to hear today, we are rolling out, we have a request before you today to roll out active shooter training in a pilot. So you'll hear specifics on that. We recently released elder abuse guidelines as well as hate crimes guidelines. We're currently working on canine guidelines. As Mr. Villeda mentioned during public comment, we are also embarking on racial identity profiling guidelines. We have included RIPA in those guidelines. I believe Mr. Villeda is going to participate as well as another nomination by the RIPA board. We've also started working on IA guidelines or internal affair guidelines. And we're also working currently on missing persons guidelines. Last week, we started a project on creating a hate crimes video for law enforcement in response to Assembly Bill 449 to get the message out. It's a collaborative effort between Post and the Department of Civil Rights and the California's new commission called the Commission on State of Hate. We hope to get that out in the next 3-6 months or so. So that is in the works. Also, in January and in February, we started a review of the management course. For those that are unaware, the management course is a requirement for all lieutenants within the first year of appointment. We have a significant number of, hundreds, close to 1,000 lieutenants that go through that course every year. So we're taking a deep look at it to see if it's contemporary and where the law enforcement executives and where Post think it should be. Also, in January and February, we hosted training or Post symposiums, one in Southern California and one in Northern California. Hopefully, some of you were able to participate. It was a one-day curriculum. We had approximately just under 400 people at each event. That was a big to-do for our staff to put together, and that went off well. Something that we mentioned a while ago at commission meetings, we're working on building space inside the office at 860 Stillwater Road in Sacramento. That project is moving along. It's just taking a little bit of time with the contractors and the Department of General Services in the city of West Sacramento. We're hoping to have, pursuant to their timeline, some of the space done by the end of May. It is not going to be done by the end of May because they haven't even broken ground yet. So we're still working on that. And then lastly, for those that were here yesterday, one of the advisory committee members, Chella Cottrell, who's a dispatch manager at Citrus Heights Police Department, spoke about the importance of dispatchers and in the law enforcement profession and the significance of dispatcher training. I can't echo that enough, not just with dispatchers. I think I'd mentioned it at a meeting 6 months ago, but just a food for thought, not that that we need to do anything or move anything forward, but constantly asking ourselves inside of Post as to whether we are missing the mark with some of the other professional staff, not just dispatchers, but other professional staff at law enforcement agencies, and whether we should be providing additional training. Historically, we haven't. We're seeing more and more professional staff being employed by departments for a number of reasons. One, to professionalize the profession, and two, sometimes it's less costly for the department to have professional staff on board, whether they're CSOs, record supervisors, and such. Are we missing that mark? I venture to say that I think at times we are. I know we have a lot on our plate, but could we do more in the future in that regard? And I just wanted to say that after she made her comments yesterday about the importance of dispatchers and really pushing that mission forward. With that, I appreciate your time that you've given me to speak, and thanks again for everything you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Alvarez. Our first item is approval of the action summary and meeting transcript from the November 30th, 2023 meeting. Is there a motion to approve the summary and transcript?
Move Brazil.
Second,
Second.
is there objection to unanimous consent? Then transcript and minutes are adopted. Our next item is our consent agenda. We will hear reports on items 3, 6, and 8. Item 7, the SB2 report, we have moved to the post-ad portion of the, and so as to consolidate a little bit. So we'll hear item 7 later. Would any commissioners like to add a report on additional items other than 3, 6, and 8? Okay, so we'll go to number 3. Report on basic course presenter statistics. Bureau Chief Carrie Holler will report. How those Lakers do last night?
That was a low blow. It's hurtful. Good morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. At the November 2023 Commission meeting, Post-Basic Training Bureau staff presented Commission on information on the basic course certification review process. During the presentation, several stated their desire to have the ability to view statistics related to basic course presenters, specifically the success and failure rates. Our staff worked with our Computer Services Bureau to develop a dashboard, which will provide basic course statistics that can be broken down by many different options. I'll ask Tobias if he can please pull it up. So this is real-time data. The information is pulled through the electronic data interchange, which is EDI. It's a little blurry. Maybe it's my eyesight. All right. So in the agenda packet, there was a couple still shots, attachment A and B, that you can also look at. So as you can see, there's different tabs, and you can kind of mess with the course title. You could click on the different types of courses. So we have our modular format presenters. We have the basic course in the extended format, intensive format. You also, at the top, it shows the year. So you could sort it by year. It goes back to 2020. Down below, you can see that you've got the course title, the presenter name. You can look at the number of affiliated students, the number of non-affiliated students, students that completed the course, the number that still employed, the number hired during training, during the course, and then the number hired prior to or on the day 1 of training. So you can filter through whatever you would like to look at on that page. On the next page, under the graph, you can, it's basically the information pulling the affiliated versus non-affiliated. You can go filter it through the presenter name or the course title. So you can look at a specific presenter and look at their different courses. And then on the bottom there, we did do a definitions page just to help provide information, definitions for people who aren't familiar with what affiliated student means, non-affiliated, extended, as you can see right there. This would be made available on the Post website under the community tab, which is on our website. And then you just go to the data warehouse, and it could be made available immediately once we decide it's what you guys would like to see. Any questions?
Questions or comments? Anyone from Ms. Holler?
Much appreciated and fantastic.
Very interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Holler. We go now to item 6, a report on peace officer certification statistics. Certification Bureau Chief Michelle Weiler will report.
Morning. Before I begin, I just wanted to remind that after our last meeting, moving forward, we will start giving year-to-date statistics rather than strictly quarterly statistics, so there's no confusion about the numbers. So as we move forward in June, the numbers will continue to get bigger. So real quick, our numbers as of the posting of the agenda, publication of the agenda, we've approved 1,037 notices of appointment so far this year and issued 784 proofs of eligibility. We've issued 624 basic certificates. We currently have 100,137 active peace officer certifications. And we have, again, at the time of publication, 158,765 inactive peace officer certifications. Again, those numbers encapsulate individuals who've separated from service for 3 or more years, as well as individuals who previously had only a proof of eligibility and separated either without, well, they separated without a basic certificate, either because they were in classifications never eligible for one, or they didn't complete probation. As far as actions taken against certifications, we have revoked 14 certifications, and that was based on those individuals who were approved by the commission November 30th, 2023, as well as default revocations for individuals who failed to respond to a notice of intent to revoke. We have issued so far 9 immediate temporary suspensions this year, disqualified 9 individuals based on felony convictions identified in Government Code 1029, and accepted 6 voluntary surrenders. In terms of separations, we have received 1,245 total affidavits of separation. Of those that were related to serious misconduct, 14 were for dishonesty, 2 were related to abuse of power, 4 were related to physical abuse, 1 was for sexual assault, 1 was for demonstrating bias. We received 3 for egregious and repeated acts that violate the law. There were none for participation in a law enforcement gang, 3 for failure to cooperate with an investigation, and none received for failure to intercede. Yesterday, Chief Salazar and the advisory committee asked for some additional information in future reports that would help us distinguish of those numbers for serious misconduct, how many individual officers were represented. So you'll see that incorporated in future reporting. And then Tobias, if you can show that screen. We, similar to what's Carrie Holler just displayed for you for a dashboard for basic courses. This won't be necessarily publicly available yet, but we are working on visual to provide you with future presentations of the peace officer certification statistics. So it can help you kind of more easily visualize what our numbers look like. If there's anything you would like us to change or add, we're open to that. Also, Chief Salazar had some recommendations yesterday in terms of displaying if there may be some additional terminology so that when people are looking at it, they understand what the numbers actually represent. And again, distinguishing the individual officers represented by serious misconduct, putting that number up there as well so that it doesn't get too confused with the actual numbers of serious misconduct allegations. And then he also asked that we distinguish for the total number of affidavits of separation, how many were for resignations, retirements, terminations, did not complete probation. So I'm open to feedback or questions.
Yeah, Sheriff Nieto.
Michelle, on the inactive and active certifications chart, the 1,500, I'm sorry, 100,058,765 number, is that certifications ever since post started, or is it for those dates that you stated in the report?
These encapsulate everybody since post, I guess.
That might be a bit misleading for people looking at the data. So I don't know how to clean that up, but we need to clean that up so it makes sense.
We can probably set parameters on that. I can talk to our computer services team for a start date from, I don't know how, 1990 maybe, moving forward, because there are probably still some people who've been working that long. So we can set parameters. Do you guys have a specific date or year you wanted me to start with?
Commissioner Nieto again. Why it's misleading, because in the report, it just says a summary and you guys give some dates. So I don't know if we need since the inception, but maybe it's year by year. And if you want to show total inactives since life began, that might be a separate, thing on the dashboard. I don't know what value there is to that though.
So yeah, it's blocked by the little image of the video in the top right corner. You can see maybe report year. Currently I can drop down to 2023 and 2024. So it would be, but again, it's still counting that number from when we,
Inception.
yeah, so I can go back to 1980 maybe and start from there. Seems like a more realistic number. But there's some people I know that are still working.
Or even a footnote
Commissioner Gordon.
indicating when it started. You know.
Yeah.
I think just some explanation within the box for context.
I agree. A footnote would seem to do
Yeah.
some explanatory, just information, because it does, the question does kind of come up.
So
Is it-
just a clarification, everybody, we prefer a footnote rather than setting a time frame parameter.
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
I think that makes sense. Thank you, Commissioner Nieto. Commissioner Brazil.
Yeah, Michelle, a couple questions. On the voluntaries, or I'm sorry, let's start with, I have two. One is on the 9 disqualified. Do we see a pattern, a trend, or a theme to those disqualifications? That'll be question number one.
In terms of the 1029 disqualification.
Yeah, that's the 9 on the 1029s.
Those generally seem to come across the board, different types of felony convictions for different types of crimes that have been adjudicated. And then you had a.
The second one's on the voluntary surrenders. What were those for? The categories that they, I know we're gonna address it later with the form that you guys are suggesting we do to capture some of that, but of the people that voluntarily give them up, do we see why they're voluntarily? I have an idea, but let's
So-
see if I'm right.
I think it will come up later, but some of these are in response to plea agreements with the district attorneys, so we don't even have an allegation of misconduct yet in some of them. Some of them are in response to receiving a notification from Post that we are proceeding with an investigation or taking the allegation of misconduct under investigation.
So those, and I think we might talk about it later, but those would be good to track in the future, particularly those that are, like you said, negotiated as part of a plea deal on a criminal case that you will surrender it. I mean, we're gonna take them above in the 1029 on the felonies anyway, but that way there's some,
So you'd
we
like to
can, we
see,
can see what they are versus, we could see we're in the process that people are voluntarily surrendering, basically plea deals or some settlement with on revocation or something. As you start to get more numbers, it might just show a pattern or a process. So.
okay,
Commissioner Gordon.
Would it be beneficial to be able to break them out between on-duty conduct and off-duty conduct? Especially on those criminal,
for the 1029 disqualifications or for both those and the
Both.
surrenders?
because I do think it's helpful to know as we're entering this process, what behavior is occurring on duty, what behavior is occurring off duty, because I think you learn from both, especially if we're looking towards the future and, as we said at the academy, how we can better, help the future of this profession to understand what is getting folks in the most amount of trouble and be able to understand training or things, deficiencies in the academy or things in hiring that we should be addressing too, so.
Okay, I can try to work that into the next report. Do you want a separate report for everything in June? Or do you want it just the current year-to-date statistics? Everything meaning last year and this year.
I think it would be helpful to have the whole piece,
Okay.
so that we're comparing as much data as we can possibly get out of it.
And
Commissioner Brazil.
yeah, Commissioner Gordon's spot on this one, because I think as we start to get more numbers, it'll allow us to identify potential patterns or trends. It could even go back to basic academy, something happening in a basic academy or an ICI course or something like that. Once we start getting this volume of numbers that come in, it's, 9's nothing, right? But 10 years from now, the commission sitting here will thank us for 10 years ago, they decided to do that. So we can look for improvement processes or identify patterns, particularly when you compare that to backgrounds. You start to see a pattern with a certain region or an agency or a private vendor doing background checks that we see that they're missing something. So we just don't know what we don't know. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Commissioners Brazil and Gordon, for those comments. Anyone else? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Wiley. Thank you for your report.
I'll be back later.
Our last consent report is a legislative update from Megan Polis will provide it to us.
Good morning. So the legislative session is underway with just over 2,100 bills, new bills that have been introduced since January 1. This is an election year. We are in a budget deficit and there's some new leadership. So that will all be contributing factors into how legislation plays out this year. I'm going to be discussing 11 new bills that could affect post in some way this morning. So the first bill is AB 1839. This bill establishes the Law Enforcement Officer Grant Program. It would provide up to $6,000 a year for individuals enrolled in a modern policing degree program at a California community college. Grant recipients must commit to working as a peace officer for at least 4 years, and recipients would agree to repay the monies if certain conditions are not met, and that money would be issued by the Student Aid Commission. The next bill is AB 2042. This is the first of two.
Ms.
Go ahead.
Would you mind just, and maybe I'm just curious, would you mind identifying the authors?
Yeah. AB 1839 was Alanis. This bill 2042 is Assemblymember Jackson. So this is the first of 2 bills related to police canines. It's the same bill that we saw last year, AB 742, but it's reworded differently. It would still impose restrictions onto the use of canines, specifically in biting. The bill is, like I said, worded differently, and it states that post would create 2 separate guidelines, one on standards and one on training. And there are specific provisions in those guidelines, and agencies would be required to excuse me, adopt policy based on those standards. The next bill is AB 2138 by Assemblymember Ramos. This bill would grant peace officer authority to tribal police, meeting specific standards, training standards outlined in the bill language. The bill also would add 2 additional members to the Peace Officer Standards and Accountability Board for participation only in the potential decertification of tribal police members. And this bill is similar to a couple that we've seen in the past couple of years. The next bill is AB 2382 by Assemblymember Rubio. This bill is currently a spot bill, meaning that it doesn't really have any substantive information in there. It would be related to a mandate for post to create training on human trafficking. So we're watching that to see how it changes. AB 2541 by Assemblymember Baines. This bill would require post to develop guidelines addressing wandering associated with Alzheimer's disease, autism, dementia, and other related diseases. The bill language includes minimum content such as protocols for deploying agency resources, developing community awareness and coordination and communication protocols between agencies. The next bill I don't have a slide for because it was just updated on Monday. It's AB 2710 by Assemblymember Lackey. This bill would require post to create guidelines on procedures during an active shooter incident, specifically to prevent unnecessary radio transmissions and inappropriate self-deployment. The bill further adds that each agency will need to meet specific requirements during an active shooter incident, such as identify the incident commander and prohibit indiscriminate parking. So this bill is born out of the incident in Uvalde. The next bill, AB 2923 by Assemblymember Jones Sawyer. This bill requires a form that is used to receive public complaints also include a provision if the complaint includes an allegation of racial or identity profiling and a space to describe the allegation. And this applies to both written and verbal complaints. The next bill, AB 3021 by Assemblymember Colra. This bill requires specific information to be stated prior to interviewing a family member of a person who has been killed or seriously injured by a peace officer. The information to be stated is for the officer to clearly identify themselves, show identification and state specific information as outlined in the bill language. And this will apply to not just peace officers, but prosecuting attorneys and investigators of the prosecution, and it applies regardless of the interview location. The next bill is AB 3038 by Assemblymember Asali. This bill would require a school district to hire or contract with at least one armed SRO to be present at each school in this district. I only have two more. The next bill is AB 3241 by Assemblymember Pacheco. This is the second of the two police canine bills. This bill concept was drafted by the law enforcement associations, and it largely resembles our current use of force standards. It establishes a use of force definition for canine use, requires posts to create guidelines with specific items to be included, and requires all canine programs to train with post-certified training. And then our last bill is Senate Bill 1020 by Senator Bradford. This bill requires each law enforcement agency and academy to prohibit the use of ethnic shooting targets. The bill defines ethnic shooting target as any physical range target that depicts a human form or part of a human form that includes skin colors or facial features from which a person might reasonably discern a race or ethnicity of the person depicted. And an ethnic shooting target does not include a silhouette target or a human form target with a non-human skin color such as green or blue that does not have facial features. This bill also further defines training to not only include the academy, but any in-service training for peace officers that involves live firearms training. Those are the bills I'm presenting on today. I like to warn everyone that we're only just beginning. These bills are going to be amended, gutted, changed as we move through the process. I have the timelines there on the screen, so you'll see that it's quite a long road to the end of August. And with that, I conclude my presentation. I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Commissioner Nieto. Manny or Director Alvarez, this is probably for you. Can you clarify on the administration of justice degree or another degree, what post has finally decided to do with that for officers coming in?
Commissioner Nieto, I believe you're referring to Assembly Bill 89. And for us, we're to a certain extent, we're in a wait and see posture at this point. So the Community College Chancellor's Office had the first phase of it was to submit a report to the legislature on what they intended to do with the modern policing degree. Phase 2 for them was to create a modern policing degree program, an associate's degree. And phase 3 for us was to implement within 2 years the requirements of having a modern policing degree and a bachelor's degree. And I caution the word "and" because the author has stated that the word "and" should have been an "or." So the Community College Chancellor's Office submitted their report to the legislature, I believe in October or so of last year, which then gives us 2 years to raise the minimum age or minimum education requirements, which in theory would make it October 2025. The modern policing degree is not ready yet. The Community College Chancellor's Office has started putting that degree curriculum together. They have advised us, as well as the author of Assembly Bill 89, that they will likely not have the modern policing degree ready until at least October of 2025. So the author, we've had several meetings with the Chancellor's Office as well as with the legislature, with the staffers in the legislature on the challenges that that's going to cause for the law enforcement community. Obviously, if the modern policing degree is ready, it's still going to take some time for individuals to complete it. And we're on the clock for October of 2025. For us, what that entails for us is when we audit the files, the appointment files, right now, the floor is a high school diploma or a GED. We will be checking for a modern policing degree or a bachelor's degree. From what we're hearing inside the legislature, it sounds like all of the parties, I don't want to speak for them, but all of the parties that have been involved in Assembly Bill 89, including the author's office, are discussing rolling back the time frame to make the adjustments to allow the community college chancellor's office to come up with a modern policing degree and also for individuals to complete the degree. We're hearing of dates, implementation dates of 2030, 2029 seems to be the date that they're kind of keying in on, but it remains to be seen. We've really said to everybody that it seems like it's going to change, but right now we're on the clock for 2025, October 2025. Hopefully that answers it, Commissioner Nieto.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Nieto. Are there any questions or comments from Ms. Polis? Then we thank you for your report and know it will be substantially different in June. Chief Salazar, did the advisory committee have anything to add on the consent, on any consent items?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The advisory committee did hear reports on items B3, B5, B6, B7, and B8. All of the comments that were provided by the advisory committee were actually commented on by staff, particularly with regards to the serious misconduct allegations and representing a total number of officers. So those comments have already been provided in those presentations by staff, and no additional comments from what you've already heard, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. We will move now to the Finance Committee item on the agenda. The Finance Committee did not meet this morning because Commissioner Ewell, our chair, could not be present due to a funeral. So we will have a brief finance report this morning from Bureau Chief Cheryl Smith. While Ms. Smith is coming to the fore, I will simply note that the general, as you've probably followed in the press, the general tone and tenor of the budget is how big the deficit is. The budget proposed by the governor makes and keeps post whole. There are no significant adjustments or changes. However, the governor's budget addresses what he estimated to be a $38 billion hole, and the legislative analyst is now estimating it's closer to 73 billion. So similar to Ms. Polis's changes that we'll see in June, there may be more changes ahead as the governor grapples with this growing deficit. Ms. Smith.
Good morning, Commissioner Long, commissioners. I'm going to just, we could skip over the 24-25 budget unless anybody has questions in regards to the 24-25 proposed budget as it currently is. I'm just going to go over where we're at with expenditures. This is the overall expenditures. This includes the state penalty fund and the general fund and where we're currently at. So for the state penalty fund, of the 46 million, we've expensed approximately 21 million. General fund, of the 56 million, we've expensed a little over 26 million. So right now we're about halfway. This is as of February 14th. Is there any questions in regards to where we currently stand with expenditures at all? All right, next slide is just a breakdown of the state penalty fund. So we have standards training and peace officer training and where we currently stand with that. So for standards of the 3.8 million, we've expensed approximately 1.1 million. On training of the 20 million, we've expensed 11 million, and peace officer training of the 13.56 million, we've expensed about 5.7. So for our total budget of state penalty fund of 46 million, so far we've expensed 21 million. Any questions in regards to state penalty fund expenditures? All right, the next one, general fund breakdown. So for standards of the 13.1 million, we've only expensed 3.3 million. Training of the 8.3 million, we've expensed 4.5. Peace officer training of the 20 million, we've expensed so far 12.3 million. And for post administration of the 14.5, we've expensed 6.2 million. So of the 56 million budget, we've expensed 26, a little over 26 million. Any questions in regards to general fund expenses?
One quick question. Is that Commissioner
Brazil.
On the standards, is that that excuse me, the low number because of hiring
Yes,
in the general fund because we're just
Yeah.
having problem filling positions?
correct. So
Okay.
we still have over 100 openings.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
All right, and the next slide is where we currently stand with contracts requiring commission approval. So any contracts of 250,000 and more. This is where we currently stand with where we're at with those contracts and what we've executed so far and invoiced. Does anybody have questions in regards to where any of the contracts are at currently? The next slide is just on the training reimbursement requests and how many training reimbursement requests we have processed so far this year and the total dollars expense for the training reimbursement requests. Any questions in regards to the training reimbursement request expenditures? Next.
Questions or comments? Good. Then I believe Director Alvarez has something to say.
I'd like to just make a couple of comments. First of all, in terms of local assistance, this will be the first year in multiple years that we're actually going to spend all of our local assistance money. And that we're projecting to be close to zero, which is a good thing that we're pushing that money out to local law enforcement and providing some form of subsidies for certain other parts of training like EVOC. So we do anticipate spending all of our local assistance money. Also, just keep in mind, this just as a constant reminder in terms of invoicing with the state system, although some of those numbers look like there's going to be a significant savings, especially with our contracts to deliver training such as the detective courses, the ICI courses and such. The state allows for up to 3 years to be invoiced, and sometimes they come in pretty late. But we also feel like we're on track to spend all of our training contract money this year. And then lastly, we did return $10.86 million of this year's money back to the state that we didn't think we would spend. That 10.86 million, $8 million relates to salary savings for some of the vacancies, as well as for DOJ and Office of Administrative Hearing costs, because we haven't really pushed any cases from the commission, from the board commission to the administrative law judges. So we returned some of that money. That money will revert back. It's going to be back in the budget again for 2024, 2025. And there was a bucket of 2.86 million of local assistance money that was thrown in a few years ago that has really never been touched in a separate bucket. That will not come back next year. So the $8 million that I just mentioned will come back. So just wanted to add those two things. We do have a strong budget for next year, at least at this point. We'll see where it ends as we go through the budget process in both the Assembly and the Senate, but so far it looks good. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Alvarez. Anything else, Ms. Smith?
That is it, but we're going on to,
Yes, we will now move to contracts. If we could get that slide up, I assume they're prepped for that one. We'll do the contracts now. We will review them and vote on the 16 contract proposals by bureau as we have in the past. There's a summary of each contract in the agenda as well as detailed backup in the attachments. And should any member wish a presentation on any of the contracts, staff is available to provide that report. We'll take a good look at it and we will go through them by, as I said, by bureau, not by individual contracts. For each bureau, when we come to a motion and a vote, I will ask if any commissioner wishes to abstain from voting for conflict of interest or other reasons. So first batch by the training program services, are there any questions or comments about any of these contracts? Take a few moments. Director Alvarez.
Thank you, Chair Long. With your permission, can we also ask the bureau chief for each one of those to accompany Cheryl during the presentation in case there's questions that are in the weeds that Cheryl may not be able to answer?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
That's the
Thank you.
presumption is that staff is here for each contract. And if anyone would like a presentation in addition to questions, please just
Okay.
speak up.
So Bureau Chief Brad Newmeyer will come up with Cheryl for training program services for the first item.
Nine, first
Commissioner
9
Gordon?
items.
I'll hold my question for the specific contract.
You want? I would like to raise kind of an ongoing issue. I'll start with the Presley Institute, the Institute of Criminal Investigation. It's just a question of basically due diligence for, staff review of these projects. Criminal investigation and quality assurance program both seem to have somewhat a great deal of disparity in the costs. There are 9 providers for the ICI, and the presentation costs per provider vary widely from $27,000 for the DOJ to $46,000 for South Bay Regional. I understand there are reasons for differential, there's travel, there's wages, et cetera. But I also recall that South Bay was also a bit of an outlier when we looked at the supervisory course costs. And I noticed that the costs for the quality assessment program, number 8, have increased by 20%, and that's also operated by South Bay. So I'm not intending to vote against any of the contracts or anything, but I'm just looking more for a due diligence affirmation and assurance from staff that we remain vigilant on these contracts, especially when there's such a disparity in presentation costs between providers, as we saw in the supervisory a couple of meetings ago. So that's all, just a comment and a question that to give us some assurance that these disparities are looked into.
Absolutely, they are, sir. We have program managers assigned to each of these contracts. There's language in there where they can do a wide variance of checks and audits on them. Each year, we start talking to our contractees in September, October, forecasting for this meeting in March. We start talking about forecasting costs. One big factor this year was that the state did change their overall reimbursement rates across the state effective January 1, which definitely affected this year's contracts that drove prices up. Some agencies actually increased their indirect costs as well, which is allowed in the contract. And in the matter of South Bay, their model is that they put the full suite together. They send everything that they can to make it as a full of course as they can that's under the allowable reimbursement. So they are a full suite. They send everything that they can to put as good a course on as they can based on their costs. They are in a place that's a very high cost for the state. We don't do meetings there because of the room rates and rental rates on AV and all these different variant things that can really drive up the cost. But we do have personal conversations with the folks over at South Bay. We know them well. We talk to them on a regular basis, and we do confirm that the cost that they're indicating is what they're saying it costs to present that course, and that's an allowable reimbursement that we provide them for the delivery of that service to us.
Yeah, I certainly am not don't mean to pick on South Bay, but when you have a list of presenters and the disparities are so great, it obviously raises questions about are we making the smartest choices with some of the providers? And contracts in general are where entities get into trouble. They're historic contracts. Sometimes they're pervasive and they just continue on. So that's all, just a word of concern.
I have a follow-up.
Commissioner Brazil.
So where is South? I know they've got some challenges with locations, but when you look at their budget, where are they the outlier? Because certain costs are going to be the same. Materials are going to be the same. That's all going to be similar. Where are they the outlier compared to others in the courses they present?
To the best of my understanding, the hourly rate for instruction is higher for them, as well as facility costs, and then the amount of personnel that they send. So that's kind of the outlier for them.
Personnel and hourly rates.
Correct. This year, their subventions did go down. That's monies they receive from other places. And they know that the wide variance at times can be explained a lot of times by that as well. Some are college-based, they'll get large disbursements, they'll get in-kind instructors that teach for nothing because their agency is being paid by the agency. They'll do it at their own facilities. There's no facility cost. There's no AV rental because they bring their own. There's a wide variance in how those costs can go up and down. The supervisory course in questions is hosted in Monterey. Who doesn't want to go to Monterey? It's a good draw. They always have a full course there, but it's an expensive place to put it on. And we're having discussions with them to talk about would Fairfield be better or would Sacramento be better? Would you get the same attendance? Because it is a needed course. And we do have those due diligence discussions with them and tell them that we have to come and justify your numbers to the commission we don't really have a dog in the fight because we're paying for a service they're providing us. But it has to be reasonable and it has to be something that you will all palate and accept as a reasonable cost for the train that we need to put on. If it's not, let us know and we can look another way. We can find another presenter. We can find another way if necessary. It's just up to you to decide what you think is best.
Yeah, and I share the chair's concern is, you know, we have a deficit. It's just a matter of how deep it is. Post hasn't been touched yet, but I think we owe surge due diligence to identify where we see variances of this significant a variance. And again, I totally understand that sometimes there's the staffing costs are down because they're using personnel from their own agency and they're not double dipping. They're just paying them to be there. But it'd be good to just take a really, really deep dive to be able to show the legislature and the governor's office that we really look at our budget seriously in the process, because it's that way we aren't getting nitpicked later. We do it to ourselves up front. So.
Commissioner Nieto, can you just tell everybody in the audience, what South Bay covers? Because we're part of South Bay, so I know South Bay.
They're a big player in our footprint. They have 3 academies. They run the QAP program for us. They're in the supervisory course. They're in the management course. So I would say they're top 2 or 3 presenters for us in the state.
And geographically, if you could describe that.
They're in the South Bay, around the Bay Area, about the most expensive place in the world. They're spread all over from north to south.
So there's South Bay in Southern California. So the South Bay, it's San Francisco, San Jose, the Monterey Peninsula, Coyote, it's they have the 3 academies. So it's a large geographic area that South Bay Regional is covering in the Central Coast area.
Other, Commissioner Gordon.
And I was just gonna say, a lot of agencies send because they have the availability for classes that we all need. So I think that is the other point, is that they're always full. They're classes that we all desperately are trying to get our folks into because of the ICI courses and what they're offering. They're hard courses to get anywhere else. So I just want to make that they're offering classes that are really harder to find in other places. If you look at the list, they offer ones that other places don't offer.
And Commissioner Nieto, I'm not defending South Bay because I do believe that we are fiscal managers of our dollars and we have to do it smartly, but they do draw in like Santa Barbara because it's in Central California. So they're drawing northern agencies in, they're drawing up outside of Los Angeles, Santa Barbara on up in, and then across like from Fresno in that way. So.
Thank you, Commissioners. I believe Director Alvarez.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. So in regards to South Bay and the courses that are listed up there, South Bay is presenting a lot of these courses, specifically the ICI course and a bunch of others. And we think their costs are reasonable. They're a little bit higher and we completely understand and we've approved them and have presented them before you. It's really for us has been the supervisory course. So we did pull the supervisory course out of the mix for them. We've had a lot of discussions with them. It just seems like that course is much more expensive than anybody else. And we pulled it. So that is not, that's the only place that we're not seeking authority to spend money with South Bay. They also present 8 supervisory courses per year, and they also do the supervisory course update under contract. We've pulled all of that, hoping that we can find some other solutions, other presenters, or that they can lower their costs in some fashion. So we may have to come back to you all in June, either with a revised request for South Bay or with additional presenters that can pick up the slack for those 8 courses that need to be presented in that area of the state. So they're on there with the exception of the supervisory course. That seems to be the only one that's really causing us some significant challenges.
And Commissioner Nieto again, and I know I've been in discussion with South Bay and I've been in discussion with the director because the Monterey County Sheriff is asking how do we get our things certified to help save some of these costs, in our area, so.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, it's just simply a call for due diligence assurance. That's all. Any other questions or comments for any of the proposed contracts in the training program services? If not, is there a motion to approve these 9 contracts?
Motion Barcelona.
Motion Barcelona, is there a second?
Can I just ask one other
Of
quick
course.
question on
Commissioner
that?
Gordon.
On the management course, I think Director Alvarez referred to it's being revamped. Is it being revamped through Post or through the current provider right now?
So it's through Post, and I probably shouldn't have used the word revamped because
Refresh.
we're doing a review of it. So we've met both in the month of January and February with law enforcement executives throughout the state. We had one meeting in Southern California and one in Northern California. The presenter that participated in that was the Government Training Agency out of San Diego. As we went into those discussions, it's been a longer project, right? We had the UC Possibility Lab take a look at it. We did a survey to the field. And now we're having these workshops, and going into the workshops, we've said, look, perhaps there's nothing that needs to be changed. The surveys have come back somewhat positive, but we should always be doing a deep dive on all of our courses on a regular basis. And if there's nothing to change, we shouldn't be obligated or feel obligated to make any changes. I suspect there's going to be some just based on the feedback that we've been provided. So it's more of a review, and I apologize for using the term revamp because it may not be a full revamp, so to speak, but we're actively in the process of just looking at the curriculum, looking at how it's delivered and such. And I hope that we can always do that with every course that we have that we deliver.
Well, and I do think it's appropriate. I'll save my personal comments for the course, but I think it's very appropriate. But my question is, as we approve this contract, is the vendor open and willing to make the necessary changes that are going to be suggested as part of this review process?
Yes, I'm sure. Well, we develop the curriculum, so they have to deliver whatever the curriculum is that we deliver, that we create. I believe there's 3 presenters for the management course as well as CHP, if I am not mistaken. Is that correct, Brad?
That's correct.
It's South Bay. It is
GTA.
Government Training Agency
Cal State Long Beach.
and Cal State Long Beach, and CHP delivers their own management course as well. So they will be delivering the existing management course until we change the curriculum, should we? Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Gordon. So we have a motion on the training program services contracts from Commissioner Barcelona. Is there a second?
Second, Moon.
Second for Sheriff Moon. Is there objection to unanimous consent on these contracts? Seeing none, the motion carries. We move now to the Basic Training Bureau and its one contract, the EVOC contract. Are there questions or concerns? Ms. Holler, I believe. Questions on the EVOC course? It's the same amount exactly. If there are no questions, is there a motion?
Motion, Braun.
Is there a second? Again, is there objection to unanimous consent to approve this contract? Seeing none, motion carries. We move now to the Training Delivery Compliance Bureau, 2 contracts. You're on your own there, Ms. Smith. Is there any questions on these 2 contracts? Questions or comments? Commissioner Brazil.
Just a real quick question on the scope of the DOJ. What's that cover? Because it's the new one.
Yes. If I can introduce Bureau Chief Tom Chalk, who has training, delivery, and compliance.
Along members of the commission, good morning. To answer your question, sir, I can run down why that increase is 200,000 more from the previous contract, which was approved in 2018 was the last time. And so during COVID, many courses weren't being presented. And I can run down what courses are included in this contract increase if you'd like to hear that.
That's the DOJ at line 12.
Yes.
That's right. That's good. It was prior. We just had none in the current fiscal year. I just saw the none in this current fiscal year, but
There wasn't a
443,000.
contract. Yeah, there wasn't a contract for it last year or the previous year before that. It's been since 2018 since they've had a contract.
And we're trying to play catch up with DOJ with these legislatively mandated courses that need to be presented and get people back up to speed, especially with clandestine laboratory training with the fentanyl problem. There's just a demonstrated need for the additional courses to be presented.
So it's not new, it's stuff we had done in the past and they just stood it down for, and then we're standing it back up.
That's correct, sir.
Okay. Perfect, thanks.
More questions on these two contracts in the Training Delivery Compliance Bureau? If not, is there a motion?
Brazil.
Is there a second? Is there a? Oh,
I would like to abstain.
oh, okay, yep. Mr. Lopez would like to abstain on this. Is there objection to unanimous roll call minus Lopez?
I have a question for council. Since I'm an agent, does it matter whether I vote on this one or not? I have no
Barcelona?
input on training, courses or anything.
It's your
there.
call as to whether you can be fair, but certainly if you believe that your relationship with DOJ is such that fairly vote on it, then you should abstain.
I can fairly vote. Thank you.
Is there objection to unanimous consent minus Commissioner Lopez? Seeing none, that motion carries. We move now to the Learning Technology Resources Bureau. Are there questions or comments on these contracts? Maybe you'd like to address, similar to Commissioner Brazil's question on DOJ, the learning portal maintenance and why it goes from $0 to $800,000.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Yeah, would maybe you'd like to just address, jumping in maybe ahead of Commissioner Brazil, similar question to DOJ, why it's a blank and it moves to $800,000 in the
Lowering
in the
Pearl,
budget.
14.
I'll answer.
Right, okay.
You want me to answer?
Sorry,
So it's
sorry.
because it's a multi-year contract. And so the contract started, it was 22-23, so there wasn't really a contract for 23-24. So that's why it looks blank. It's a multi-year.
And the follow-up question, because that's what I thought it was, how many years is that the new contract for?
So they're gonna change it to do it yearly for this year, not do them.
Yes, we're considering going to a yearly because we're trying to catch it up on a fiscal year basis. Right now, there's an overlap because of the way that it has transitioned over the last couple of years. So we're making it into a probably a year and a half. So we're trying to do a catch up right now with that.
Get it out of calendar and go into fiscal.
Exactly.
Okay, so this contract, the 777,000 will get us through the current fiscal year and additional, or is it that just for the next fiscal year? I'm sorry, not the current one, for 24-25.
Okay, so you talked about the 777 for the
777,
learning
yeah.
portal maintenance, but are we still talking about the video or are we talking about the learning portal?
The learning portal is what I was looking at.
So so the learning portal, because we do have the new portal, we are also coming out of a 2-year contract and we're going to a annual contract so we can evaluate the product since it's a new product.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Ritchell. Any other questions or comments regarding the Learning Technology Resources contracts? Seeing none, is there a motion?
Motion, Braun.
Is there a second?
Second.
Would anyone wish to abstain from this tranche? Seeing no abstentions, is there objection to unanimous consent? Seeing no objections, the motion carries and we are on our final contract for POSAD. Take a look. And Ms. Del Munayo will come up if there are any questions or comments on this contract. Mark 43. Seeing no questions or comments, is there a motion?
Brazil.
Braun, second, Braun.
Motion and a second.
You
Does
can
anyone
have
wish to
it.
abstain? Abstain from voting on this, on the Mark 43 contract? Seeing none, motion carries. No objection to unanimous consent. That finishes up the contracts. Kathy, you okay? You need a break? You okay? We're gonna go to the Basic Training Bureau at this point. I was just wondering if are you good? Okay. All right. We'll go move to D, the Basic Training Bureau. Welcome back, Ms. Holler. Item D1 is a report on the development of the basic course curriculum and proposed pilot programs for LD Learning Domain 44 active shooter. Basic Training Bureau Chief Carrie Holler will report.
Hello again. So back in March of last year, our staff facilitated a discussion with the Academy directors and coordinators at our Basic Course Consortium about the need for active shooter training in basic courses. There were already 13 academies that had incorporated presenter-specific content covering active shooter training. Those that were in attendance agreed that the topic should be incorporated into the basic course. We then facilitated 2 workshops, one in October of last year, and the second one was January of this year, with subject matter experts representing 8 different basic course presenters. After they reviewed the active shooter related content within the existing learning domains, they decided that the training should be its standalone learning domain. During the workshops, they developed the proposed training and testing specifications, which were attached in the agenda. As this new learning domain has never been presented statewide, post staff requests approval to pilot learning domain 44 active shooter, with the following basic course presenters. San Diego Regional Public Safety Training Institute, California Highway Patrol, Sacramento County Sheriff's Office, Butte College Public Safety Training Center, Ventura County Criminal Justice Center, Riverside County Sheriff, and San Joaquin Delta College for the modular format. These presenters were selected to provide feedback from diverse perspectives throughout the state. All of the pilot presentations will be completed by the fall of this year, which would allow us to review the student feedback, the instructor feedback, and then report back to the commission. This will add to the 664 hours in the regular basic course. That was a question yesterday. So as it's being proposed right now, 16 additional hours. That could change either lower or higher based on the feedback that we receive. For the modular format, it's being proposed, Module 2 will have 6 hours and Module 1 will have the full 16 hours. Anybody have any questions?
Result?
I have a couple and a request. So has the curriculum already been developed for all the presenters and they're going to deliver the same exact curriculum?
Correct.
Okay. And then if we could consider for future consideration is adding an active shooter block into the dispatcher academy. There's a lot of lessons learned in the active shooters that don't necessarily apply to some of the natural disaster and or man-made disaster training that they get and the development of that. And if we can also go back and look at any requirements we have throughout our curriculums for ICS and NIMS. And for background, I'm going over some of the things we found in Uvalde. I was on the review team in Uvalde. Now that the report's out, I can talk about it. And those are some of the lessons learned that we had there. So I think it's important that we use that as a jumping off point for us to kind of look at some of those because those were some of the big failures were in Uvalde. There's a bunch of them, but those were some of the big ones were. So happy to help out with that. Manny actually asked me for that help, but this is good. We're moving in this direction. So this is helpful.
Other questions or comments from Ms. Holler? Director Alvarez.
I mean, you have, just as a reminder, you have the training and testing specifications, and that is what needs to be approved. We're not allowed to insert the training into the academy as a mandatory requirement unless we pilot it, and we're not allowed to pilot it without your authority. So we're asking for that. What you're not seeing are the student workbooks. And I know that the Basic Training Bureau has already created a draft of the student workbooks. You don't need to approve those, but those are also, they've already done all of that. So thank you, Carrie, for doing that. So that's what's before you.
The questions or comments? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the curriculum development and proposed pilot as described in the staff report?
Nieto moves.
Second.
Motion second. Is there objection to unanimous roll call? Seeing none, the motion carries. Item D2 is a report on proposed changes to Commission Regs 10,001 and 10,059. Ms. Holler will report on this item.
There's several changes and I'll go one by one. The first one is to add The addition of a PC 832 coordinator requirement. So this will require presenters of those courses, which is the PC 832 arrest and the PC 832 firearms course, to designate a coordinator with sworn law enforcement experience. We currently require a designated coordinator for the regular basic course and the modular basic course, just hasn't been a requirement for the PC 832 courses. The second would be to restrict those who have had their peace officer certification suspended, revoked, or voluntarily surrendered from serving in various basic course related positions. Back in April of last year, the changes were made for Commission Regulation 1052, and it was inadvertently left off of Commission Regulation 1059. So this change would just realign those two. The next one would be to add the requirements to the positions of a scenario manager and a scenario evaluator. The added requirements for these positions will require the designation to be determined based on knowledge, experience, training, and successful completion of a post-approved field training program. In April 2021, Post implemented a requirement that a scenario manager and a scenario evaluator be in possession of their post-basic certificate before being designated to one of those positions. We have continued to identify issues with scenario managers and scenario evaluators who have not worked in a patrol setting and have never completed a post-approved field training program, and they're being used in these positions. So we feel it's in the best interest of the students attending the regular basic course that those evaluating them and managing the testing process would have patrol-related experience in addition to completing a probationary period. The last is just some cleanup language that we moved over. Back in April 2021, we inadvertently left off when we created Commission Regulation 1059, there's a few things that we inadvertently left off, such as the pilot program and verbiage that restricts attendance to one agency. So this would ensure that all the regulatory requirements applicable to basic course certification can be found under one regulatory section. I just want to point out on the agenda, there is verbiage regarding a recruit training officer ratio that should have been removed. So that is not to be for today. At this time, I'll take any questions.
The question on, for the PC 832 arrest and firearms course. The way this reads, could technically someone who has had their certification suspended, revoked, or surrendered teach an 832 class?
No, it would be any instructor. I believe it covers the instructors. And then we added the coordinator and the director.
Just want to make sure, because it reads basic course. I want to make sure that 832 is included in that.
Yes, the PC 832 courses are considered basic courses.
Gordon, any other questions from Ms. Holler? Chief Salazar, did the advisory committee have any comments on this item?
Advisory committee, thank you, Mr. Chair. The advisory committee did receive a report on this item. They agreed with the staff recommendations and action. There was a question with regards to the piece about the recruit training officer to student ratio, but as staff has mentioned, that has been pulled for this time. No further comments.
Additional comments or questions from Ms. Holler? Seeing none, do we have a motion?
Move personal.
And a second? Is there objection to unanimous consent? Seeing none, that motion carries. I'd like to go back just briefly to the proposed course curriculum and the pilot programs for the active shooter. I neglected to ask Chief Salazar what I believe there was some good discussion in advisory committee, so I'd like to apologies for not asking at the time. Chief, could you tell us what the advisory committee had to say?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The advisory committee received a report on the LD 44 active shooter proposed pilot program. There were some questions just regards to recognizing that active shooter events largely become multidisciplinary or multi-agency events. And then thus the importance of, the training that's provided being consistent across the state so that everybody's receiving the same training with similar responses, hopefully. And then with that said, also the importance of the selection of the instructors that provide the material that are carefully vetted and competent in the category. So the discussion from the advisory committee is really around those two items the importance of consistency in the selection of trainers.
Thank you, Chief. We move now to the Certification Bureau. Item 1. You want to break now, Kathy? All right, we'll take a 10-minute break right now. It is what, 11:22? So how about 11:30? Okay, Kathy, is that enough? Okay, back here in 8. Next up is the Certification Bureau. Can we get everyone in the gallery to take their seats, please? Item 1 is a report on proposed changes to Commission Reg 1205, serious misconduct. As you probably recall, we had a robust discussion of the proposed language at our November meeting, and we agreed to post the language for comment from the field and any interested organizations before taking a vote on that language, which we'll get up on the screen so you can jog your memories a bit. My understanding is no objections or comments have been forthcoming. Is that correct, Mr. Director?
That is correct.
Yeah. Certification Bureau Chief Michelle Weiler will report on this item. Just want to be sure the language is posted, and at some point we'll like to read it before we take the motion, read it out loud. Ms. Weiler?
Yes, so do you want me to go ahead and read it out loud when it's posted or?
Yeah.
Perfect. So just as a reminder, you were presented with this proposed language in November with a request for you to decide whether or not you wanted us to continue down this road and make these amendments to this specific part of Commission Regulation 1205. Again, this is to help us set some parameters within the framework that's provided by the penal code so that we have a guide not only for ourselves and the commission and the board members, but also for our regulated public and the general public to understand how we are going to be reviewing allegations of serious misconduct related to a demonstration of bias, what the parameters are that we're going to be working within to determine whether or not a demonstration of bias has occurred.
Ms. Weiler, could you just maybe start by revisiting what kind of circumstances led the department to wanting to make this change?
Yeah, so the original language is rather vague, and we had a lot of questions both from the agencies in the field and with a lot of discussion amongst our own staff as to how we would measure a demonstration of bias, and that's led us to this point. And Toby was more deeply involved in some of those conversations than I have been. Toby, if there's anything you want to add, jump in. And so we decided that we would be best served for ourselves as well as the field or the agencies and the potentially affected officers if we were clear on what our guidelines would be for determining that bias had occurred or demonstration of bias had occurred. And then get your feedback on it, put it out to the public. Again, we did not receive any public comments on this item. So we have no additional recommended changes to the proposed language we have a minor proposed change from the language that we presented to you in November. And I believe that was at the request of one of the commissioners, a couple of the commissioners. I can't remember the language though. Toby, you made that change?
Do you wish to comment?
Sure, I think I'm being asked to comment, so I'm happy to do it. So yes, we had made some changes because some of the language that had been preliminarily accepted, there was some wording that the commission didn't want us to include. So we made those changes and removed that language, which the commission didn't like, before we posted it. Some of the concerns that had come up in terms of what demonstrating bias is, there's a couple of issues. The first is, to demonstrate bias, does it require an actual action by the officer out in the field? So a concrete action in which you can show that the officer engaged in bias policing, or would it be sufficient if you have a demonstration of bias in terms of words, which would indicate to a reasonable person that that officer would not fairly perform his or her duties in the field? So that was the first. The second is that the issue, since the legislative language included in violation of policy, that could raise some issues which arguably are merely internal, like a purely internal EEO complaint that might be between two people that wouldn't necessarily indicate that the officer may engage in biased policing. So those were the concerns that led us to bring this to you, in the past. And again, we presented the language, and then when the commission reviewed it, they did request that we modify it somewhat, eliminate some kind of ambiguous language, which is what we did prior to it being posted for public comment.
If everyone's memory is jogged, are there any comments or questions about this language or the circumstances that led to the proposal? Ms. Delmont, I was here as well. Do you have any comment you'd like to make before we move on?
Just specifically, the verbiage that was removed is we had closed-mindedness. I think if you all remember, that was part of the language. We struck that from the language before it was posted. The other issue that came up is we do outline words, actions, or other conduct. There was a request by the commission, should inactions also be included in this language? So just to recall some of the discussion. We thought perhaps other conduct could include inaction, so we did not include that with the language, but that for discussion purposes. Thank you.
Questions or comments for Ms. Weiler or Ms. Del Munayo?
Commissioner
Braun.
Braun, that was my question. Would this cover inaction if someone chose not to take action based upon a perceived bias?
Arguably, we could include that as other conduct, the fact that they failed to act or do their job, because again, they were biased against a certain class would probably be inclusive of other conduct.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. Thank you.
Like me to go ahead and read the language?
Yeah, in an abundance of caution and clarity, why don't you read the language for the record?
Okay, before I read the language, so just again, that this proposed amendment is to make clear to all that the words, actions, or conduct demonstrating prejudice, intolerance, contempt, or hatred towards a person because of their membership in a class of persons protected by Penal Code Section 13-510.8B5 is impermissible when it would lead a reasonable person to conclude the officer has not or will not fairly or impartially perform their duties. So the specific language,
Could you hold on one second as well? Because I believe what you're reading is different than what we're seeing. Just
yes, so I'm going to read the specific language now.
okay.
We're adding subsections A and B. Subsection A, an officer's demonstrating bias for purposes of this regulation when the officer either shows or displays by words, actions, or other conduct, prejudice, intolerance, contempt, or hatred towards one or more persons due to that person's membership within a class of persons identified in Penal Code Section 13-510.8A5, when such words, actions, or other conduct would lead a reasonable person to conclude that the officer has not fairly and impartially performed or will not fairly and impartially perform his or her law enforcement duties. Subsection B, an officer engaging in racial profiling in violation of Penal Code Section 13-519.4 is demonstrating bias because profiling casts suspicion on a class of people without individualized suspicion as to the person being stopped.
Any questions or comments on the language from commissioners?
Commissioner Braun,
Commissioner Braun?
it might be clearer, and I think the legislature is tending towards this to say their instead of his or her. Vicky, sorry.
Seems, anybody have seems reasonable to me. Mr. Darden?
Michelle, if we made that change, would that be non-substantive or would it have to go back out for comment again?
I believe it would still be non-substantive because it's a pronoun issue, but I will double check with OAL as long as the commission motions to take a vote with the new text.
So as the language currently stands, if the commission approves it, that would go into effect because, well, it would go to OAL for OAL's comment as currently listed on the board. If the commission wanted to change his or her to change it to their, then that would be a change which is arguably non-substantive and you would have to check to see if it would need to comment, but it's possible it wouldn't. Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct.
Okay.
It could be less substantive, but let's go with the there. Any other comments from commissioners on the proposed language? Chief Salazar, did the advisory committee have any comment?
Mr. Chair, the advisory committee did not have comment on this item.
And if there are no further comments, is there a motion to approve the language with the technical amendment of there?
Motion Braun. Second.
Mr. Knapp, wake you up and ask you to call the roll, please.
Commissioner Barcelona,
Yes.
Commissioner Braun,
Yes.
Commissioner Brazil,
Yes.
Commissioner Cooper, Commissioner Yule, Commissioner Gordon,
Yes.
Commissioner Long,
Yes.
Commissioner Lopez,
Yes.
Commissioner Moon,
Yes.
Commissioner Nieto,
Yes.
and Commissioner Rodriguez.
Unanimous vote, Mr. Knapp, correct? All right. We move now to item 2, is a report on proposed amendments to Commission Regulation 1210, voluntary surrender. Ms. Weiler will remain with us and report on this item.
Yes. So before you, oh, there we go. Before you, is a proposed revision to our current voluntary surrender form. Some of the changes that we are proposing to make is to specifically identify whether the surrender was a result of a settlement or a plea agreement during criminal proceedings. We during the course of the last year have been receiving some surrenders as part of a plea agreement, and we were not necessarily aware that that's what it was until it was followed up by the local district attorney using the voluntary surrender as part of the agreement. And then also for the officer to be able to stipulate that it's not for either of those reasons as a reason for surrender. And then we also added that the form, Tobias, can you scroll to the next? We also added that the form be notarized because we had a couple of circumstances where we needed to take into consideration the officer's submission, slightly illegible, et cetera. And so as an extra precaution that Manny has wanted from the beginning, we added a requirement for a notary so that we could have proof that this was in fact the officer who was submitting the voluntary surrender for themselves.
Questions from Ms. Weiler? Commissioner Brazil?
I just have one question. In the box above the criminal administrator, would that include, does that include if there's a settlement based on revocation hearings once it reaches us?
It could.
So I mean, it would
Yes.
cover that, the
Yeah.
language there would cover, we're part of the administrative process that could be considered. Okay,
Yes.
I just want to make sure we're capturing those. That's
Yes,
circumstance.
and we could, when this is approved and a bulletin goes out advising the change, we can incorporate that into, yes. As a side note, I have some numbers for you. This morning, I reported 6 surrenders as of the date of publication of the agenda. We actually have 10 voluntary surrenders. 1 was a result of a plea deal, and 9 resulted from our letters to the involved officer that we intend to investigate. Thank you.
Additional questions or comments? Is motion to approve the proposed changes to Reg 1210 as described. Oh, I need to, thank you for reminding me, even though I haven't jotted it down. Chief Salazar, did the advisory committee have comment?
Mr. Chair, no comment from the advisory committee on this item.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the proposed changes to Commission Regulation 1210 as described in the staff report?
Ghetto moves.
Second.
And seconded, is there objection to unanimous consent? Seeing none, the motion carries. We're going to go back for just a minute to what we just voted on the roll call on the proposed changes to Commission Regulation 1205. I believe Ms. Del Munayo found a typo essentially in the language that Ms. Weiler read. when she read section 13510.8 subdivision A5. It should be subdivision B.
Correct. It's B5.
I will check with OAL on that. I think
So-
that would also be non-substantive.
Yeah.
Basically, it was a typographical error.
Typographical error. So in terms of a vote, to be clear, is there objection to substituting the prior roll call for this item? Unanimous consent. Seeing none, motion is clarified and carried. We move now to Peace Officer Standards and Accountability Division. Item F, let's start actually with the consent here. Please come forward, Ms. Domina. Let's start with what was on the consent agenda as number 7, which is the SB2 report. And then that will be 0.5, and then we'll move to number 1.
Good morning, Chair Long, members of the commission. This is your standard report on all things Senate Bill 2 and kind of where we're at operationally. I'm going to do the administrative update as I typically do, and then my colleague Brian South will be giving you more of the statistical profile and talking to you about all things professional conduct. If we want to go ahead and put that on the screen, Tobias, thank you. Okay, so the administrative updates include our recruitment. There we go. Next slide. We have actually now recruited a new bureau chief within the professional conduct bureaus. The bureau chief started early February, and his name is Robert Guyton. He is seeing the northern district of the professional conduct bureaus. So we do have all of our bureau chiefs in place, which is fantastic at this point. We are still actively recruiting full-time permanent law enforcement consultants, but as you can see from this report, we have quite a few RAs. And so we are doing a pretty good job of supplementing with some temporary staff in the meantime. And we're getting to the point where we're probably at a saturation level with our RAs. So we'll be having to look at whether or not we bring on any more so we don't end up having to lay people off. The first hearing of the Peace Officer Standards Accountability Advisory Board was held on November 14th. There were 2 cases. Those 2 cases are before the commission today. In both cases, the board voted to revoke the individuals that were before the board. There are 4 cases that are going to be heard on March 21st. Those cases will come to the commission in June. Those dates there are listed May 15th, 16th, and July 24th, 25th are the board meetings or board hearings for the remainder of this year and then a little bit into next fiscal year. I did want to point out that we did some in-person training. Many of you were there and you participated, and that happened on February 13th. That was really to give our board and commission an opportunity to go through the stages of review upon appeal and to look at the limits of what you're reviewing. And today you'll have firsthand experience on that in terms of these pre-hearing decisions versus what's going to happen post-evidentiary hearing when it's before an administrative law judge and we have all of the mitigation, including all of the testimony, and that proposed decision comes back to this commission for a final determination. I thought the training went very well. I think what we learned mostly is kind of where folks are in terms of their understanding of this process, how they feel about the process, and moreover, what they expect to see in terms of the case review. We also had our LECs and some of our professional staff attend investigatory training that was hosted at Post February 20th and 21st. And that was really talking about administrative investigations versus criminal or civil or other types of investigations, and truly from the lens of a regulatory state oversight body, which again, the review is very different. The decision and the impact to the individual holding a vested property interest is very different. Next slide, please. In terms of the decertification hearings before you today, you know there are 2 cases, and we will be reviewing those cases at the close of the business meeting today. In terms of what to expect next for the commission, we just recently in January sent 6 additional notices of intent to revoke. Of those 6 notices we sent, 4 of those individuals appealed, which means they're now in this process. So 4 of those cases, as I mentioned earlier, will be heard by the board on March 21st. We are seeing an uptick in voluntary surrenders. You've heard this a couple of times over the last 2 days. We primarily think this is because of the notice of investigation that we're sending to subject peace officers. The reason we believe this is prudent is it gives the officer, first of all, notice that Post is looking into a case where there was sustained findings by their agency. It also gives the officer an opportunity to decide at that point whether or not they're even interested in appealing or reviewing anything that Post ultimately decides. This saves kind of time, energy, workload, et cetera, for the board, the commission, and then again, for the officer. We've talked to you a bit about disciplinary guidelines in the past, and this is a much more involved conversation that I don't want to get into too much detail today, but we do have some proposed disciplinary guidelines that we're going to bring to the board, or excuse me, to the commission in June. This really does give you an opportunity to kind of apply those 12, 13 factors, which are factors that we consider when we decide whether or not there's clear and convincing evidence to bring a case before the board or the commission. Adopting disciplinary guidelines is going to go a long way for your own consistency in terms of your decision-making, but also it helps guide the administrative law judges when they make a proposed determination regarding the cases that come back to the commission. We know that they will make a proposed determination, both on findings in terms of whether or not we've met our legal threshold of clear and convincing evidence, but also what is the appropriate discipline attached to the wrongdoing of the officer. So we want to, as an oversight body, give them some direction. Otherwise, it's kind of a shot in the dark for them. In those disciplinary guidelines, we can outline things that we may consider reasonable stipulated settlements. I know we've kind of tossed that around a little bit with you folks before, but they are terms that the commission feels may be appropriate when an outright revocation is not in the best interest of the state, the public, or the individual officer. That's the subject of the review by the commission. So look forward to those disciplinary guidelines and happy to take questions on that. We do have for you today a little precursor to a full video that has been produced by Digital Outpost for our Learning Technology Resource Bureau. And if we can cue that up, we can show kind of our teaser, if you will. This is a very short, I think just a glimpse at what this broader video is intended to do for our field.
A new law has been passed in California establishing a decertification process for peace officers. As a former officer and a current trainer, I've seen firsthand the uncertainty and apprehension this law has sparked among the people I know and work with.
Regardless of how well you try to handle a call, there are times where complaints come through. That is unnerving when you're out working.
You're like, okay, I'm not gonna go out and look for things or pull over cars just in case, like, what if we make a mistake? Because we're human at the end of the day. And then we're gonna be held not only through IA, we have to worry about Post clearing us as well.
In this series, we will unravel the complexities and real-world implications through discussions with stakeholders looking at it from multiple viewpoints.
We are now no longer passengers in this journey. We now must take more of an active role.
We had some of the same concerns when we first started using body-worn cameras. Most of the time, the camera has supported the actions of the officers. And so if they're aware of what those areas of misconduct are, they don't really have anything to worry about.
Process is there for a reason. It's there to ensure that your rights are protected. And if you're doing everything right, you're going to come out on top.
In a conversation with officers from across the state alongside Post staff, members of law enforcement voice their concerns and search for answers from those who know.
There's questions as to what's going to qualify as serious misconduct. And I mean, can that change from reviewer to reviewer?
I've never seen like a hard definition as to what they're looking for.
That could cause a lot of stress and anxiety. Is there a definition of serious misconduct?
There is a definition of serious misconduct. Part of Post's responsibility, actually the Post Commission's responsibility, is to adopt a definition of serious misconduct.
We drill into the details through one-on-one interviews with Post experts who are working these cases.
Passing SB 2 was another piece that personally now affects them. And I think that they all need to know what steps and what processes Post is taking when we look at cases that are submitted. I think it's important for them to know that.
We're taking the case as it is, and we look at the underlying behavior, and we are stridently neutral. It helps the communities to have some voice into the process. I think it's one of the strengths that gives Post its ability to be trusted in moving these cases forward.
Engaging directly with Post executives and board members, we hear their perspective on how they think this legislation came about and what they have done to prepare for the impact this has on both law enforcement and the community.
Your hairstylist can lose their license, a doctor, a lawyer. When it finally dawned on somebody that there was no way to decertify a peace officer, that was kind of mind-blowing.
I think that's what the community is looking at, is that they're being held to the same standards. They don't want to see them being able to lose their job here, but then be hired at another agency.
It's about integrity. It's integrity in the profession and integrity in the process. Trust in the fact that we understand we're dealing with individual lives and livelihood.
The changes in certification and decertification have illuminated more than just a procedural shift. This journey is not just about a new law, it's about re-examining our commitment to the community, law enforcement, and each other. Watch this Post On Scene investigative series now.
So the entire video is a little over 40 minutes, but it's broken up into 7 segments, and we're still making some fine-tuning adjustments before this gets rolled out to the field. But this will be the field video. There is an additional video for the academy recruits that we're continuing to work on, and we think that video should be available within the next few months. So any questions on any of that?
Mr. Nieto.
Yeah, I just want to say, thank you. It looks like a professional video, not done in somebody's backyard, so.
Thank you, Digital Outpost.
Moon, I have just a quick question, not necessarily on the video, but when we look at the report and the data on the revocations, are we also indicating whether or not the job status of the employee through their agency before we get down to the decertification? I think it is, that data is important, that a lot of the chiefs and sheriffs and their agencies are doing the appropriate things with the termination. And likely clearly the decertification is for that next position, as the video showed. Moving forward from today on, from SB2 on, I think it could be thought that of course they are now because they're being held accountable. But I think even the prior cases that we had from the first the items. Proactive,
Yeah, the retroactive cases.
Retroactive
Yeah.
cases to showcase that chiefs and sheriffs were terminating employees that had misconduct, so that it's not just the narrative that we're doing it now because of SB2.
Absolutely. I think that was something that when Michelle was giving the certification statistics, and I think Commissioner Brazil brought that up too, some narrative around terminations, separations, resignations, retirements, to discuss why, what is because they're reporting this in EDI. So the law enforcement agencies are reporting that the termination was for serious misconduct, or the involuntary resignation, if you will, involuntary separation was for serious misconduct. So those are statistics we do have. And I think that's both what Commissioner Brazil and what you're referring to too, is some context around that, because there is that active step that the agencies are taking. And just as a matter of, anecdotal, kind of giving you guys some context to this, because I was talking to Digital Outpost about this, and it's something we didn't cover in the video, but I think it's important to have public discussion about. And that's the fact that there are a number of times where the agencies are making a decision to terminate an officer for serious misconduct that doesn't fit into one of our 9 categories. And we've received some frustration. I recently had a conversation with the chief about just that. There were a number of policy violations, and the chief felt very strongly this individual shouldn't work anywhere, ever. But Post didn't have the bandwidth because of the limitations under the 9 acts of serious misconduct to take that a step further and actually decertify the individual. And so while I think at the very beginning of this process, we were concerned that so many people were going to be swept up in this broad, overarching 9 acts that are very, they're not tightly defined, that we were going to sweep up good officers. I think what we're experiencing from the post side of things and looking at some of these cases is that we're limited on some of the things we can do. And again, I know you guys will all love me for opening up this can of the worms about the overarching definition. Everybody happy about that? You want to get into that again? But it, but it really did allow for some of those things like neglect of duty, failure to supervise, things that really can lead to more serious outcomes, right? That do put the public at risk, but we're very limited about when we can act on those things. So to your point, Commissioner Moon, thank you for bringing that up. It is something that we're seeing.
Director Alvarez, comment?
Yes. So Commissioner Moon, I know about 9 months ago, we received some feedback from chiefs and sheriffs about that specific topic that, hey, we should be making note that a chief or a sheriff or a division head has already terminated an individual, that that action has already been taken. And I know we modified our website based on that feedback. For instance, with our temporary suspensions, when an individual meets one of 3 criteria, they're charged with a crime, they resign in lieu of, or they retire in lieu of, we were simply saying immediate temporary suspension, whatever the criteria was. Now we are stating in there, terminated by the department for one of those 9 criterias to properly reflect that that department has already taken action against that individual. It's not post coming in and trying to clean it up, so to speak. So we did put that on our website, and the revocations, as you'll see today, specifically outline where the department's taken some kind of action as well. And obviously that's part of the agenda. So we do want to properly reflect when a department's taken action already prior to us getting involved. Yes.
So Commissioner Long, if you will, we can go into the statistical.
Unless there are any additional questions or comments on that consent item report. You want to move to number 1 now?
We still have the statistical data
Okay.
that Bureau Chief Brian South will cover. Next slide, Toby. Thanks.
So,
Good afternoon. Thank you. So I'll go into some statistics and updates on the professional conduct side. And starting with that number you see there of 22,729 agency misconduct reports that has been received into post statewide. Important to note that those include allegations. The statute says allegation, complaint, or charge. So those are agency misconduct reports that the agency has gone into Mark 43 and reported to us allegations of serious misconduct. 69% of those are those retroactive cases. So meaning that it's before 2023. We've also received 515 public complaints, and we wanted to just put some context around that number of the total agency misconduct reports we received and how that's equating to potential decertification cases. We have the benefit of data now, a little over a year in. And so when we looked at it, what we found was it's about 8% of those reports we received from agencies end up with a sustained finding by the agency. After that, the bureau chiefs do a triage of these cases, and it's around 5% that on its face appear to have potential merit for decertification. Now, we really want to point out that the remainder of those, that 92% that are unfounded, exonerated, or not sustained by the agency, we are doing our due diligence for an independent review on all of those cases. So we're looking at all of them. But when you look at that, rather large number of, now it's going to be closer to 23,000. It's really 5% are the most likely that may merit decertification. So it's just important for context. We are also continuing to triage reports for prioritization, and our professional staff are working on non-actionable retro, meaning that, again, these retroactive cases that the statute does not allow us to take action, we are having our analysts reviewing those and helping clear that backlog. The other thing our excellent professional staff are helping us with as well is helping review these unfounded, exonerated, or not sustained cases that come in. Bureau chief will still review and approve those, but our analysts are helping do those reviews because you can imagine we have many thousands of those that we're looking at, and we do look at every single one of them. We are also continuing to offer Mark 43 training for agency users. And we're doing that on Zoom, but we're also coordinating an in-person meeting with our Mark 43 users at the agency level to occur at Post, hopefully this summer in July. Now, just a few notes about our numbers of cases and just terminology-wise. When we talk about reports that we've received in, again, those are the reports that the agencies are sending us. We then create a case and assign it. So in talking about these cases that we're working, we have 15,624 total cases at this point. Of those, 10,327 are open cases, and want to break that down a little bit. 54% of our open cases are what we call open with Post. So that means that we've gotten the information and the agency typically has rendered their finding, and now we're doing our review and our due diligence on these evaluations. But 46% of the open cases are what we call open with agency. What that typically means is that an agency has done their required reporting, their 10-day reporting, because they've become aware of an allegation of serious misconduct. They send it to us, but they're still doing their IA, their internal affairs investigation, their administrative investigation. So in those instances, we have it recorded in Mark 43, but it's open with the agency, and we're waiting to receive notification from them that they've concluded their internal affairs investigation, and then we start our evaluation. We also have 5,297 closed cases, and that's 34% of our total cases. And I'll just end with going over the top 3 areas of serious misconduct allegations. And again, it's important to note, these have been pretty consistent from when we started. But it's important to note what this is saying is these are what the allegations that are being reported to Post. It's really not going into what the ultimate conclusion is. But what we're seeing is 39% of the agency misconduct reports we're receiving are for the physical abuse, which is excessive or unreasonable use of force allegations, followed by 27% for demonstrating bias and 12% listed as abuse of power. And that concludes my report. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. South. Questions, Commissioner Brazil?
I have a suggestion, because we've got 2 levels of retro, plus we have current. Can just for my eyes, and I think maybe the public, because this goes out to the public as well, that we break that 22,000 down into individual categories that we see. It's not 22,000, but it would be X number between this date and this date that we can take action on, this number between this and 2023 that we can't take action on, and then from the start of our collection on, so that people see that, because 22,000 jumps out, but we're going retro.
Right.
So people can see what's past and what's current. And then even down lower, as you guys look at it and say, what would it make sense to kind of tell a better picture? Because it looks like that's all that's happened since 2023 in a year, and it's not. It's 3 years back, and it just doesn't tell the story correctly, I guess, is the sort of just a suggestion there, and then I have a comment after that.
We absolutely can do that. I think there's something that fell off this report that's in the materials that was sent to you, and that's of the agency misconduct reports we received, it represents about 14,940 officers were involved in these AMRs, is what they referred to them as. But you're absolutely right. So I think what is a little misleading about the data, and we've talked about this several times, and we're trying to figure out a way to equitably balance the input with the output, which is you have a lot of reports. You have a lot of reports that could be non-jurisdictional, meaning we can't do anything with them. It doesn't fall under post one acts, one of the acts of serious misconduct. You also have the non-actionable, which is what you're referring to, that they were look back cases, but they did not fall into one of the 3 categories that we can actually take action for. Now, arguably, maybe we shouldn't have been taking in those reports because they're really just sitting there and they balloon this top number. So I think there's been a lot of discussion around whether or not the reporting of that was advantageous or not, because they're not things that Post can move on. So we can definitely separate out the data and show context to those numbers. What will help, I think, really tell the story or complete the story, if you will, is the actions. Is of all these reports that are coming in, what was actionable and what did we do with those actionable reports? And granted, we're a year in, so we're just wrapping our arms around, this massive dump of information. And I think that time will ferret out what those actions are and tell the real story, which is, I think, what, Bureau Chief South was getting to is initial screening. 5% of what we're looking at looks to be the types of cases that were intended to be handled under Senate Bill 2 with those 9 acts of serious misconduct. That's a relatively small amount given the 23,000 reports that we have. But yes, we'll separate that out for you.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, going back to what Sheriff Moon said, is when we start looking at revocations or suspensions or settlements, whatever we decide our categories are, that we also tell the story of what the agency did before we ever took action. So that by the time it got to us, they were terminated, whatever happened. I also think it's important to tell the story if someone was terminated and before we took action, that the employee sought employment somewhere else. So we can see are things continue to happen, or are people really out there still trying to get other jobs before we were able to take action? Again, telling that story, because that's what started SB2, right? People going from agency to agency jumping. I think it's important we actually look at that when we look at revocations. Between termination or revocation, or resignation and revocation, they were looking for another job. So, and again, it's just the story to tell, because I mean, that's the real result. Is this what caused SB2, and actually it stopped it or slowed it down or whatever it is. I just don't know what the data is going to show.
So I think that's going to be something that's going to be very apparent to you as commissioners when you are reviewing the cases before you, because the officer's history is going to be part of the case review. So when we're talking about revocations, you're going to know whether or not the individual is still working, whether they've been terminated, whether they resigned. As Manny mentioned, Director Alvarez mentioned, the ITSs are listed on the website. It tells you whether they separated during the pending investigation, whether, or resigned, I should say, during the pending investigation, whether they were terminated. In terms of revocations that you guys are hearing about today, and I want to make sure we make this clear because I think we're blending a couple of different things that are really separate and apart. The revocations we're talking about today, where we're giving you statistics, are those revocations that are as operation of law. They're revoked because they have felony convictions. Whether they happened prior to January 1st, 2022, and they're considered ineligible, those people couldn't work as peace officers if they wanted to. They're not eligible to be peace officers. Now, whether or not an agency may still have them employed and we're unaware of it, that's something that we need to have a conversation with the agency about. So revocations themselves are by operation of law post January 1st, 2022, those officers are revoked. 99.9% of the time, although I'm going to lose my own bet I had with our director here, those people aren't working as peace officers anymore because they have felony convictions. They can't get hired. When we talk about revocations moving forward for serious misconduct, you're going to have that level of detail because it's going to be in your case analysis. So it's really that the separations, involuntary resignations, perhaps there are even retirements that get reported to post through EDI where we don't have a serious misconduct case on this individual. That's really, I think, the data that you're trying to get your arms around that may be an anomaly that we don't know. The agency will report to us if it's an involuntary, like I said, an involuntary separation as a result of serious misconduct. And we can start capturing that data. In terms of cases, you're going to know those things.
Man, aside from the work, I'm sorry, thank you. Aside from the work history, you're also going to see any other disciplinary actions for serious misconduct or any investigative actions for serious misconduct, whether substantiated, exonerated, and such, will also show up in those investigative reports. So you'll see that history as well.
Brazil. I kind of digressing back to what's not in here, and I totally understand the executive you're speaking with that says, wait a second, I've got an employee, shouldn't be a cop in this state or anywhere, but it doesn't fit the criteria. Do we have a reporting I think I'm answering my own question, but we don't have a reporting mechanism that allows a chief that if it doesn't meet serious misconduct to push it forward. Because there's no statutorial ability for them to do it, is there? If it
So they
doesn't meet,
do.
if it doesn't meet the 9 criteria, can they just submit it? Here, I've got a guy who's got dozens and dozens and dozens of things that we've sustained and we're firing, and is there any way for them to report it if it doesn't meet the serious misconduct criteria for us to look at, or?
They absolutely do, because I don't think there is a true line of delineation between some of those policy violations, or I should say it's a very thin line. I'm going to give you an example that I think is relevant to the question you're answering, which is, or asking, which is dishonesty. We will have agencies report acts of dishonesty because dishonesty is one of the 9 acts of serious misconduct. But the dishonesty they're reporting doesn't meet the definition. They will still report the dishonesty. In some of the areas that have been reported that they're categorizing as abuse of power, don't necessarily fall into the abuse of power rule for the 9 acts of serious misconduct. So I think they are still reporting those things because in their mind, these should be reported. And perhaps they'll fall under acts that violate the law. And so they are reporting them, but it's just when we do our due diligence. And then there's also the threshold issue, right? So there's the threshold of, yeah, by preponderance, we could take action against this individual. But Post needs to prove by clear and convincing evidence that this individual was guilty of something that is inclusive of one of the 9 acts of serious misconduct. So I think by and large, they're reporting it. It's just whether or not we can do something with it.
Mr. Gordon.
Hate to even broach the subject, but I do think when we're talking about, and to your point about the definition, I think tracking those termination cases that Post has determined do not fall within, that they've received and that do not fall within the 9. If we were going to revisit the definition, I think that is the data that we would use to do so. You know, looking at, is there a hole that we're missing based on what is being submitted that chiefs feel is part of that definition, turns out not to be, that are terminations. I think that's where, as a commission, we could go to look for the data to support, you know, making a change to the definition of misconduct. So that's, I would advocate that as you guys are, you know, doing this, I'm not saying that that needs to be part of the public portal at this point, but to inform the commission on, you know, a potential change to the definition of misconduct. That's the information that for me as a commissioner, I'd like to see.
Yeah, I think that the closed cases, doing an analysis on the cases we could not move forward with that are closed, no further action. Right now, we don't have a mechanism in Mark 43 to really get to that level of detail. And that's one of the limitations of the database that we're currently using to manage the cases. But I think we can, as a division, start to track those closed cases where, as I say, there was a there, we just couldn't reach the threshold, or it didn't neatly fit in one of the boxes. But we truly believe that this is the type of misconduct that there should be something done beyond just a termination where the individual can get hired somewhere else. And so to your point, Commissioner Gordon, I think what the division has done, and you guys don't see this because it'd be really getting into the details of the closed cases, is we write very extensive closure statements. They're almost reports that they detail what the agency's actions were, what the agency took in terms of their final discipline, and why Post couldn't take action. And so those reports are in Mark 43 as part of the closed cases. But I think what you're asking for is to extract out just the raw data on those and talk about the types of closures that we're seeing that don't neatly fall into one of the 9 acts. And I can tell you just, you know, anecdotally, we've got the dishonesty and neglect of duty or dereliction of duty are cases that we see that just don't fit.
Yeah, and sorry.
Commissioner Brazil.
I strongly support what Commissioner Gordon said. And I think it's important. I think she identified it as where do we get the report? We can't do anything with it, but the employee was terminated.
I think that's that key. They were fired, so somebody thought they shouldn't be a cop. In at least their jurisdiction, which sometimes applies to others, but then looking at that and again, seeing the gap, because we talked about it before, when we talked about the overarching definition, that we would sometime in the future, depending on how far out, we'd have to come back and look at where the gaps were, do the gap analysis. I think we've already started to see it. And I'd like to see if we can kind of make it almost a standing item when you do your presentations of where we have find gaps, and then we can decide how we move down that path, either a different overarching definition or reaching back out to Cal Chiefs and Cal Sheriffs. We've seen this gap. What are you seeing at your end? And how might you want us to fix it? Because they're the ones coming to you that, hey, how come you can't help us out in this? And then reaching back out to Cal Chiefs and Cal Sheriffs to involve them at the front end once we identify that gap before we redefine it again. So that's just my long-winded story of more work for your division, that you're 103 people down, but that's all right. That's good.
That's okay.
That's it. Those RAs you were thinking about getting rid of, don't get rid of them just yet.
I think this conversation is consistent with the commission's discussion over the previous months about developing the 9 and whether we needed a catch-all or an overarching definition, but that we would want to see as this developed, the more of a rationale for that. I think that's what everyone's leading to here. I'm sorry, did I interrupt you?
Okay. Just one point that our Bureau Chief, Michelle Weiler, just handed me a note, just because it's the other part of that data that you're asking about that may not end up in the serious misconduct bucket, but for every separation in a law enforcement agency post SB2, they have to check a box and do an affidavit of separation. So we may not capture it all on the misconduct side, but we may be able to capture it. And I think I was mentioning this to you, the EDI side, where it's being reported as a separation and the reason for separations. Now, that's a given that sometimes it's just a transfer, right? They separated because they're transferring between one agency and the next, and there is no underlying conduct. But to the extent that we can kind of catch that sweep, that data with what we're seeing on the serious misconduct side. Also, just so you know, our bureaus talk to each other about this. So if Michelle gets a separation or termination where the agency has indicated there's some misconduct as part of that separation, she is looking in Mark 43 and communicating with our bureau chiefs to make sure there's a report. And if there's not a report, then we're reaching out to the agency to ask the question. We see you separated X officer or X sergeant for X reason. Have you reported this in Mark 43? If not, why not? So we are, that link is there within the division. And so we can try and capture some data around that.
Additional comments or questions? Chief Salazar, I believe the advisory committee had a good conversation about this issue today, so maybe you care to share some of that with the commission.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The advisory committee did have some good discussion on this. I'll start with the most recent comment about the affidavits of separation. And we were talking about that number, and then with that slide, it also showed the number of allegations for serious misconduct, which add up to 28 allegations of serious misconduct, but doesn't represent the number of officers. But really is a very small percentage of those total numbers of affidavits of separation. So we talked about the same, giving it additional context on those affidavits of separation, how many are terminations or resignations. I think it kind of tells a more complete story. And so with regards to the SB2 stats, the committee appreciated the context that staff is trying to give to those numbers, particularly the percentage that end up either being sustained or actionable by the agency or by post. Trying to look at my notes here, but again, number of allegations versus how many officers are represented there. And then the importance of, so we had the top 3 serious misconduct under allegations, but I would be curious to know what the top 3 serious misconduct categories would be for that 8% or 5% that ended up being actionable or sustained, because I think that's important. The number of allegations versus, and then also being able to show, what the agencies have done. So we had a conversation with this with a group of chiefs as well, where agencies are required to report the allegations. It's also then important to show what ends up being sustained. or what the agency did or what, and so I think, you know, that 8% number, but even diving into that a little bit deeper tells a more a more complete story. Let's see here. We had some discussions about the timing of the voluntary surrenders and where we've seen increases after the notices went out to officers. And both Brian and Manny discussed the triage matrix that posts use with regards to making those determinations. So I think that covers most of what it was, but you know, again, just the number of allegations, kind of diving into those numbers a little bit deeper to tell a more complete story, both what the agencies are doing, but then what those reports actually end up being. And, you know, like I said, a large number of allegations, but what does those actually mean at the end of the day? And the number of officers that are reflected in that. So I think that covers the gist of our conversation.
Thank you, Chief. Are there additional comments or questions on this report?
Sir.
Scribbling, nothing
Nope,
to share at this
just
point?
notes.
All right. If there are no more questions or comments, we'll move then to item 1 under POSAD, which is a procedural overview for commission review of proposed decisions. Ms. Delmona will report.
This is really kind of forecasting what we anticipate after the ALJ has done a full hearing and you have a proposed decision by the administrative law judge for this commission to consider. And something that we wanted to just put before you, and perhaps today is not the day you need to take a vote on this, but consider by policy if there are some things that we want to put in place, because there are some very strict timelines in terms of you as the oversight body adopting or making a final determination of a proposed decision of the administrative law judge. So when the administrative law judge issues a proposed decision, they have 30 days from the date of the hearing to submit their decision to the oversight agency. The agency has 100 days within which they must act on that decision. Depending on when these decisions come out, it may not align with your regularly scheduled commission hearings. As such, there is a procedure that is legal, defensible, and it's to do an electronic vote, where each of the members, the voting members, would receive the proposed decision of the administrative law judge and their statement of findings, if you will, statement of issues. And you would be able to weigh in on that decision by an electronic vote. It used to be by mail vote, but now most people handle that through some sort of secured transmission of the case materials. However, there may be questions. There may be issues with the administrative law judge's proposed decision. And so you would want to be able to have the option to hold the case for a hearing of the body, the commission. You can decide as a group whether or not it requires a certain number of holds before the case will actually be held. And you can either deal with it telephonically as a commission, or you deal with it in an in-person meeting. In my experience, we required at least 2 individuals to request a hold before the case would actually be held. But giving yourself the option to do this electronically is probably wise, so you don't lose jurisdiction over any proposed decision that may come out of an administrative law judge. Essentially want you to consider a policy. So perhaps if this is something that you would like us to move in that direction, with the help of our chief counsel and our legal team, we can develop a policy for you folks to consider in June and adopt, which gives you that option. For cases that are already in line with your commission hearing, we can just schedule them to be reviewed during the time you do your normal course of business during a regularly scheduled commission hearing.
Commissioner Gordon.
Would it be possible to suggest that if the decision that comes out of the judicial process is the same as what the commission initially recommended, then we could do the electronic process. If the decision is different than what the commission initially voted on, then that's when I would recommend that then the process we come back together as a group, because then there has to be some additional new information for it to be clearly vastly different than what we voted on. So I would propose that be taken into consideration with whatever you come back to us. If it is the same as we already had voted on, then I would support a electronic process, but if it is different, then I would recommend that we get back together. So that's my comments on what I'd like to see come back to us.
Just a little straw polling here. I certainly agree with Commissioner Gordon. Is there any comment on Commissioner Gordon's comment? Is everyone more or less in line with that thinking?
I
Sure,
like
Ron?
Commissioner Gordon's proposal. My question is, what happens if we do nothing in the 100 days? Does the ALJ decision stand or? Okay.
Correct. Yes, the administrative law judge, I should have covered that. Thank you, Commissioner Braun. The administrative law judge's decision shall take effect and it becomes a matter of public record.
Commissioner Brazil?
Is your thought, one, I love Commissioner Gordon's idea. I think it's very appropriate. Is your thought to only implement this if we know we don't have a commission meeting within the 100 days, or
It's
is that
really-
just open to our conversations here? What was your thinking?
It's really at your discretion. So procedurally, in my experience, the boards that I worked with chose to do the mail votes or electronic votes, kind of universally, unless there was a reason to hold that. Otherwise, when you start getting a volume of cases and you hold them all for the commission meetings, you could be rendering a decision on 7, 8, 9 cases that you really all agree should just be moved forward. So you're holding up the final disposition of the case. So you also need to be concerned about the timeline. So if you have an issue with an officer who's gone through an evidentiary hearing and you believe this individual should not hold a certification as a peace officer, the sooner you as a governmental body make a decision, the sooner that revocation may take effect. If you hold it until a commission meeting, arguably the individual's in limbo, the public's in limbo, et cetera. So you also have to consider the public safety aspect of this as well. But with regard to holding them because you're having a meeting, that is definitely something this commission could choose to do. If it's falls in with a regularly scheduled commission meeting, your default would be to hold them for the commission meeting, or your default would be to vote electronically, unless, of course, the administrative law judge's decision deviates from the commission's initial recommendation.
Commissioner Nieto, and maybe this is a question for the director. What would it look like if we have to come back together? Would we are we allowed to do it by Zoom, or it would always be in Sacramento? And because it would be short notice if it's within that window, I'm assuming.
I'm gonna defer that one, Commissioner Nieto, to our legal counsel.
Sure. So the deliberations following the ALJ are done in closed session. So since they're done in closed session, I haven't really thought through doing a telephonic closed session meeting. I suppose it's possible that we could. And we would just immediately go into closed session and do it. Well, that's possible. That's certainly something we can look at.
Comments?
Only one
Commissioner Gordon?
additional that, based on the comments of a fellow commissioner, I would want, to your point, for it to be timely and not held for notification, and not only but for the fairness to the officer and the complainant as well. So as part of that process, I think it's in our best interest to act as quickly as we can once that decision is made.
So June seems like the appropriate time to work on, to agendize this and to work on a policy that maybe we can even talk about in the interim. There may be ways per Sheriff Braun's concern to draw some lines there in terms of when we need to have it, or if it's a couple of days, we can probably wait those couple of days and do it at the commission hearing. But any objection to coming back June with a more formalized proposal? Okay. Thank you. Chief Salazar, did the advisory committee have any comments on this issue?
No comments from the advisory chair, Mr. Chair.
Mhm. Item 2 is a report on the pre-January 2022 ineligible peace officers. Ms. Del Munayo will report. or Ms. Weiler will report, or they'll both report.
I'm back. Yes, so item 2 is going to be a report on the individuals who have been deemed ineligible to serve as a peace officer based on felony convictions prior to January 1st, 2022. This report is informational only. No vote is required. So as you can see, we have the name of the officer listed, their last employing agency. The district column is based on our 4 professional conduct bureaus and the districts that they represent, or the areas of California they represent, the date of their conviction and what their conviction was for. I reported. I reported earlier a specific number on the number of ineligibles. These numbers are more current than that because this was pulled together just as the agenda was being published. So this number is slightly different from the numbers I presented to you this morning. After the next report, you'll see that we have a total of 10 individuals that had felony convictions that we acted on this fiscal year so far, this calendar year so far.
If I may, just to confirm, Michelle, this is part of the review of a large data dump by the California Department of Justice of approximately 400 different convictions that we're going back and verifying the convictions. Because obviously some of these are very old, and I don't want to say it's lower priority, but it's actions that we're having to review to make them ineligible as opposed to revoking. Correct?
Right.
So
Correct.
Data dump. Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
this is after a review of the data that we received from the Department of Justice. So you will probably continue to see these because they are requiring extensive amount of work between our analysts as well as our the analysts in our Legal Affairs Bureau to compile all the necessary data, the attorneys to do the necessary analysis to determine whether these are eligible convictions for us to consider under SB 2.
Okay,
Darden.
And if I may, I believe we have been receiving felony conviction information. Some of it is also reported through Mark 43. So while it's true that DOJ is statutorily required to give us a conviction list, and some of those convictions are quite old, and we have green folders in our office that are up to the ceiling on these, but some of them are also reported through the Mark 43 by agencies. And if for some reason that's not in the DOJ list, we will also take that case and work it up. And what I don't know is if any on this list are any that were not on the DOJ list, but those are the 2 primary sources that we get felony convictions from. So basically, if there's any way that we learn that there's a felony conviction, we will, or a disqualifying conviction, I should say, under Government Code 1029, then we will do the investigation regardless of the source.
Comments or questions? Mr. Brazil?
I can't help myself. Just because I think it's really super important, because we're going to, that we clearly identify in any public reporting we have, which ones are based on prior pre-SB2. We're going back in time versus someone looking at it going, oh my gosh, look at all the felony convictions cops just had. We're very clear these are old ones, like the 1986, those from the new ones that are coming into Mark 43 of recent ones since the legislation was either proposed or enacted. So we're very clear what's out there, because you can look at the numbers going, holy cow, look how many cops are committing felonies or disqualifying convictions in the public reporting side.
And of necessity, since we split them up into the ineligible list versus the revocation list, that is what those 2 lists mean. So the ineligibles are convictions that predated the enactment of SB 2, and the only legislative remedy that we have is to mark them as ineligible on their profile. A conviction that postdates the effective date of the statute, that permits us to revoke. So on the separate item, we have revocation. Those are post 1/1/22 convictions that permit us to revoke.
Yes, and also on our website with the Peace Officer Certification Actions list, which we did move the definitions to the top based on your feedback and training. You'll see that everybody is initially listed, everybody who has a felony conviction is initially listed as ineligible pursuant to Government Code Section 1029. Those that were convicted prior to January 1st, 2022, that item will remain that way. Those who were convicted after January 1st, 2022, once we present those individuals before the commission, and you guys vote on that, then that status will change to say a revocation pursuant to Government Code Section 1029 and the Penal Code section as well, so that there is a clear distinction. I don't think that is noted on the website under the definitions. I will make sure that that is also there so the public knows what they're looking for.
Questions or comments? Thank you, Ms. Weiler. Item 3 is a report on post-January 2022 peace officer revocations based on felony convictions. This item does require a commission revocation vote on 6 felons who will be posted. Ms. Dominayo, I believe, are you, or Ms. Weiler is presenting?
So yes,
Actually, can we hold off 1 second? Chief, I neglected to ask you about the the pre-2022 cases.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were no comments from the committee on this item.
All right, but we're back on the thought pattern here.
Yes, so before you is a list of the individuals who have been convicted of a felony since January 1st, 2022 that our staff as well as the legal affairs staff have worked to determine are no longer eligible to be peace officers based on their felony conviction. Again, because these are after January 1st, 2022, it will require your vote. And these individuals will be have their certifications revoked. That's why we need your vote on it.
Questions or comments on this issue, on this item, on these individuals? Is there a motion to approve the peace officer certification revocations, these 6, based on felony convictions, as described in the staff report for, could you go up to the top? Let's read the names for the record. To approve peace officer certification revocations based on felony convictions described in the staff report. I'm sorry.
They aren't all felons.
And Fernandez.
They're disqualified.
issues
I'm sorry,
the-
disqualifying, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay,
Ah.
disqualifying.
Disqualifying convictions, not felony. Thank you. William Ayala, Jeremy Cox, Luke Gilbertson, James Hernandez, Adam Marlowe. We got to scroll up one more. And Brian Pardue. Is there a motion to approve the revocation?
Motion, Moon.
Is there a second?
Brown.
Motion is second. Mr. Knapp, please call the roll.
Commissioner Barcelona, Commissioner Braun, Commissioner Brazil,
Yes.
Commissioner Cooper, Commissioner Yule, Commissioner Gordon, Commissioner Long,
Yes.
Commissioner Lopez,
Yes.
Commissioner Moon,
Yes.
Commissioner Nieto,
Yes.
and Commissioner Rodriguez. It's unanimous.
Motion carries unanimously.
If I may, Mr.
Ms.
Chair.
Weiler.
To address the prior questions regarding the information, additional conviction information for these individual officers, is this sufficient reporting to address your prior questions, Mr. Brazil, or would you like a separate report when I present the statistics?
Don't need anything separate. It was all good. Thank you.
Thank you. Motoring ahead towards lunch, we move now to committee reports. The advisory committee chair, Visalia Police Chief Jason Salazar, will report on the advisory committee meeting held yesterday. Chief.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The advisory committee did meet yesterday. There were a number of items. We heard reports on a number of items that have already been provided comment from the committee today. We did receive some reports from individual committee members. We thanked committee member Walt Allen representing CATA for his service to the committee. Yesterday was his last meeting. Member Shella Cottrell representing the Public Safety Dispatch provided a statement on the importance and history of public safety dispatchers. As Director Alvarez mentioned earlier, And also a reminder of National Telecommunications Week that is coming up April 14th through the 20th. From PORAC, report from our committee member just discussing the importance of the legislative engagement for law enforcement groups after receiving the legislative update. We also welcomed a new member, Lieutenant Brent Stalker from the Fresno County Sheriff's Office, who's representing CAPTMA, which used to be CAPTO. So they've changed their name, but it's a Police Training Managers Association. And they're looking to increase membership and engagement with their organization, and we welcomed him to the board. And then yesterday, we also held the review of the annual Post Excellence in Training Awards. The advisory committee reviewed 4 different nominations that were received over 3 award categories. Under the individual category, we received 2 nominations. One was for Officer Andres Rios from the Santa Monica Police Department. The second was for Sergeant Derek Folk from the Fairfield Police Department. After discussion of both nominations and the guidelines and categories provided by Post for these awards, the committee recommends awarding the individual category to Officer Andres Rios from the Santa Monica PD, and as a runner-up, Sergeant Derek Folk from Fairfield PD. We reviewed 1 application or nomination for the organizational category. There was 1 applicant. The committee reviewed this application and nomination and did not believe that the nomination met the award criteria and did not make a recommendation for that award to be given. And the final category was a nomination for the lifetime category. That nominee was Lieutenant Wayne Windman from the Redondo Beach PD, who had a very impressive nomination, has contributed greatly to law enforcement training over his career. He is a prior recipient of the 2017 O.J. Bud Hawkins Award that was given by Post, and the advisory committee recommended awarding the lifetime award to Lieutenant Windman. There were no nominations received this year for the O.J. Bud Hawkins Award. And just in conclusion, the advisory committee members did have some comments and discussion on the desire, obviously, to see more nominations or for consideration for these awards, because we're sure there are other very worthy candidates who are out there that just we did not receive nominations for. And that concludes the report from the advisory committee, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Before we move on, let's, again, abundance of clarity, can we get a motion in turn to adopt the advisory board award nominations as reported by Chief Salazar? I believe we need to weigh in, Mr. Director. Yeah, so is there a motion to approve those nominations?
Motion, Braun.
Second? Objection to unanimous roll call? None noted, so moved. Is that the conclusion of your report, Chief?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Questions for Chief Salazar on the report? Comments? All right, then. Chief, we discussed this yesterday. I just want to bring up something that commissioners and staff alike have discussed. Mr. Grotkow is here somewhere. We talked about what had been somewhat flagging attendance at advisory board meetings. Last meeting, we talked about whether we should do something about this. Do we have the slide on policy on that one? We can put that up. Essentially, the post policy is that the commission can jettison someone from the advisory board if they miss 2 unexcused meetings in a row. The conversation has been, should we change that wording from a may to a shall and add a proviso that says the commission may, excuse an absence. Obviously, someone is sick, someone gets called to military duty, whatever comes up, there are extenuating circumstances, there are reasons to miss. Conversations, and I'll ask the chief in just a moment, but our conversations would be, we'll come back to this in June, agendize it. Once we get a sense of what the advisory board would like to do and what the will of the committee is. Chief, do you have anything to say or add to this concern? It was a good turnout yesterday.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would say we had a good attendance yesterday. We have a number of vacancies on the committee at this time, but we only had 2 members absent, and but we also have a number of new members on the advisory committee that I think are providing some very valuable feedback and engagement, which is good to see. We had some good discussion yesterday and the past meeting. But yes, I agree. Obviously the role of the advisory committee is to be present, to engage in reviewing the commission agenda so that they can provide valuable feedback to the commission on a number of these items. So to do that, you need to be here. So
conversations with some of your members, there was an interest, and obviously we have no interest in, we're not looking to call anyone out or stick any fingers in anyone's eyes, just trying to provide a little bit of an impetus for the members. There have been several members who have been vacant for long periods of time. We won't deal with this until June, but what's the will of the committee on this? Any comments or concerns?
Commissioner Braun, what defines an unexcused absence?
Well, what I would suggest on that, and whatever the will of the commission is that's so vague that we would simply remove that and say the commission may decide on unexcused absences and leave it to the commission to decide, because there's such a wide gamut of things that could serve as an excused. There's a lot of reasons for missing a meeting, of course. So we were hoping to maybe make that a little bit tighter, while at the same time leaving it up to the commission.
Gives us some leeway for people, like you said, with an illness or some sort of family emergency or something like that matter. A tighter definition of unexcused, or notification, how much in advance they need to let you know. I don't have an answer. I was just.
Yeah. That's why we won't be proposing anything today. I was just trying to get the will of the commission. If there's some language here that people are more comfortable with, basically just trying to remind the members of the advisory board that we need their opinion is valued and we need them to show up. If no one has additional comments, we can certainly continue. Mr. Grotkow, we can continue with consultation with others to work on a proposal that is, again, not problematic, but sends the message without tying anyone up. Okay. Any comments on this? We'll move to H. The following correspondence was sent from Post to Darren Allison, the interim chief of the Oakland Police Department, expressing deep sympathy over the tragic on-duty death of Officer Tuan Le. New business, the advisory committee appointments, per a request from the California Academy Directors Association to appoint Tammy Morrell, immediate past president of the association, to the Post Advisory Committee as a replacement for Walt Allen. Any questions or comments?
Actually, just
Commissioner
for a
Gordon.
question in relation to the last topic. Although the appointments are typically come from different groups, so they're, those nominations are made. Would it be helpful if they actually had to sign what the expectations were? If there was a standard, just so they know, it's not just a appointment and something to put on your resume, but the participation is extremely important. So maybe even at the Cal Chiefs level, we've recently done that for all of our committees. So instituting something where they're actually signing and understanding what that, how many meetings and what that looks like. Just a suggestion as part of what staff will bring back.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a comment on that. When the advisory committee members do come on to the committee, they're given essentially an onboarding by Post staff. And those recommendations or those expectations are made pretty clear. So they do. I don't remember if we signed anything, but I'm certain Post staff could look at that. But it was made pretty clear to committee members when they came on and onboarded that was the expectation. So
Perfect. Thank you. And I'll make a motion.
Motion to replace Walt Allen with Tammy Morrell as a motion. Is there a second? Is there objection to unanimous consent? I know we'd all like to just take a moment and thank Walt Allen for his ongoing decades of public service. Ms. Morrell, I don't know if she's here. She has big shoes to fill. Mr. Allen has an amazing resume and is still moving a million miles an hour. I first met him when he was the director of the Youth Authority 20-some years ago. He was a charm to work with. It was a time when they were the largest juvie facility in the nation. I was trying to help make them one of the smallest in the nation, but we got along fine. He's also an appointee of Schwarzenegger to this commission. He's a graduate of the FBI Academy. He was a Chino cop, sharpshooter, and a field training officer, a California DOJ special agent and assistant chief. He's also the mayor of Covina. He serves on way too many boards to mention, and he's director of the Rio Honda Police Academy. So we can all wish him the best and hope he can find something to do now that he's no longer on the advisory board. Future commission dates, upcoming commission meetings will be held June 12th and 13th at the post headquarters in West Sac. September 12th, 2024, location to be determined. And November 20 to 21, 2024 at the mothership in West Sacramento. Yep, Mr. Director.
Just in terms of the next meeting, as you all know, the advisory committee would meet, generally speaking, on June 12th, and you all would meet on June 13th. As was discussed earlier in the day, we have 4 cases that are going before the Peace Officer Standards Accountability Advisory Board in March. So there are 4 potential cases that would come to you in June. I don't know how you all would prefer the schedule, but I imagine that will make a very, very long day if you want to hear 4 cases as well as have the regular June commission meeting, which includes awards, or if you would like to do it over the course of 2 days and allow for us to try to work out a schedule so that it doesn't all have to be in one day. We could perhaps try to do something on Wednesday, part of the day, and then Thursday. I just throw that out to you. The only other, the other options that we've discussed is to have more commission meetings to hear all these cases, but I suspect that you all would rather just, fly into Sacramento or travel to Sacramento once and get it done all at once. But there will be potentially 4 cases for you in June to review.
So how much, if we came in on Wednesday, then we could get, how many hours do you think?
I would imagine each case is probably.
No, I mean, how many hours in the day before, following the advisory committee?
I would imagine the best way to do it would be to do the peace officers, the hearings the first day, half of the day, have advisory meet half of the day, have the hearings half of the day, and then hold the regular commission meeting the next day.
Everyone being present midday on Wednesday. Concerns, comments?
Yeah, we would either have.
Midday if we needed to do 4, if the goal was to hear 4 revocation cases, correct?
Yeah, well, yeah, it would be either in the afternoon from 1 to 5 or from, 8 to 12. Either way is fine with us. It's good. It'll obviously have a trickle down effect, so to speak, to the advisory committee because they start at 1. If they start at 8, they're gonna have to fly in the day before for sure on Tuesday, which is, obviously fine for us, but we're gonna need to get hotel accommodations and, get the schedule. So I would suggest that advisory start in the morning and then the commission start from 1 to 5 and then hold the next day as the regular standing commission meeting, the business meeting. That would be my recommendation.
A lot of nodding heads. Does that seem appropriate for them, plan for them to work on? Thank you, Mr. Director. We will now not adjourn to closed session. If anyone needs, there's no need to do that. If anyone needs a Tamara Evans fix, they can see Toby privately. And at this point, I believe we are concluded with everything but the revocations. So we will take our lunch break now. It's 1 o'clock, probably 1:30. It's probably 30 minutes. 30 minutes back at 1:35 to begin the discussion on the 2 revocations cases. Thank you.
John something. John.
I don't remember him.
All right, are we all back? All right, new ground for the commission. We move now to the two revocation cases before us today. We will only be reviewing the facts and evidence as presented by the Peace Officer Standards Accountability Division and the recommendations of the Peace Officer Standards Accountability Advisory Board. In both cases, the board recommended revocation. This is not an evidentiary hearing. The rules of evidence do not apply. Evidence is not formally admitted into the record. There is no need to make objections, and objections will not be ruled upon. Under the penal code and applicable state regulations, the hearing will only determine if the matter proceeds forward to a full evidentiary hearing before an administrative law judge to determine whether the allegations are true and merit revocation or suspension. At this stage, the commission must only consider the recommendation of the board and the facts the division, after investigation, believes can be proven at a later evidentiary hearing. For that reason, today, the commission will entertain arguments as to whether or not those facts, as presented by the division, demonstrate a high probability that serious misconduct occurred as defined in Penal Code Section 13510.8 and Regulation 1205. Such a finding simply results in the matter being moved forward to an ALJ. No actions by the commission prior to a full evidentiary hearing amount to a final determination that an officer engaged in serious misconduct or that revocation or suspension is warranted. Just a few brief notes on process. Prior to case presentation, I will ask if any commissioners feel the need to recuse themselves from a vote due to a personal relationship with the officer facing revocation or another related reason. I will ask that commissioner to leave the room for the remainder of the case in question. Should recusal result in an insufficient number of commissioners to reach the 2/3 vote necessary to revoke, I will recommend moving the case to the next commission hearing when we have sufficient membership. And today, with 9 members present, a 2/3 vote requires 6 votes to revoke. And of course, the majority for a suspension. At any time following case presentation and comments from the public, a motion is in order. Generally, a motion will either be 1, adopt the recommendation of the board to revoke certification and send that recommendation to the ALJ, or 2, recommend a suspension of certification for a specified time, up to 3 years, to the ALJ. Regarding closed session, there is no need to move to closed session to discuss the case or ask questions. Still, we will move to closed session if any commissioner so requests, and at any time. I will now call upon, the first case review is post 2303691, James Kurtz Fillmore, who at the time of the events at issue was employed as a peace officer with the LA Police Department. I now call upon post law enforcement consultant Robert Bringolf, Professional Conduct LA County Bureau, and Carrie Woolley, Attorney, Legal Affairs Bureau, to provide a report on the case of James Kurtz Fillmore. Thank you, Mr. Bringolf and Ms. Woolley. In one moment, to introduce Chris Beatty to my left, who is the attorney for the commission during these proceedings. Mr. Bringolf.
Afternoon, Chair and Commission. My name is Robert Bringolf, and I'm a law enforcement consultant assigned to the Los Angeles County Professional Conduct Bureau. Next to me is Carrie Woolley, an attorney with our Legal Affairs Bureau. We're here with respect to the case of Post v. Detective James Fillmore from the Los Angeles Police Department. This is post case 2303691. Before we start, it's come to the division's attention that Mr. Fillmore's counsel was provided with the location and time of this hearing earlier this week. While the information has been posted publicly for several months on Post's website, Ms. Wilcox's formal notice was not provided until earlier this week. The division would like to apologize for that error and any subsequent challenges that a counsel faced as a result of this oversight. With that, I'll move forward with our presentation. In this case, the division found reasonable grounds to believe that Detective James Fillmore engaged in serious misconduct in violation of Penal Code Section 13510.8 B6 alleging that Detective Fillmore engaged in acts that violate the law, that were repeated and sufficiently egregious as to be inconsistent with a peace officer's duty to uphold the law. Detective Fillmore was arrested after crashing a police vehicle while driving under the influence of alcohol. In the division's investigative summary and findings, it recommended revocation of Detective Fillmore's post-certification. In accordance with the requirements of Senate Bill 2 and as required by Penal Code Section 13510.85, sub A, sub 4, this matter was heard by the Peace Officers Standards Accountability Advisory Board on December 14th, 2023. Following the conclusion of that hearing, the board voted to revoke Detective Fillmore's certification. The division asks that you adopt that recommendation today. As required by Penal Code Section 13510.85, sub A, sub 5, the record of that proceeding is before you, which includes the agenda and attachments from that meeting, a transcript of relevant portions of the hearing, and the recommendation of the board. Part of the matter was heard in closed session by the board, so Commission Counsel will be able to advise you with respect to those proceedings. The law requires your review to be of that record before the board, which is before you, and which you have had an opportunity to review. To assist you in your review of the record, I'll take you through the case as presented there. As the record shows, I presented the case before the board substantially as follows. Detective Fillmore started his law enforcement career as a police officer with Los Angeles Police Department in 2003. Mr. Fillmore was promoted to the rank of detective in 2014. On February 27th, 2016, while off duty, Detective Fillmore was stopped by the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department for failing to stop at a traffic signal. When the deputy approached Detective Fillmore's vehicle, he noted the smell of an alcoholic beverage emitting from the vehicle and from Detective Fillmore's person. The deputy observed an open 25-ounce can of beer in Detective Fillmore's center console. The deputy conducted an investigation and determined Detective Fillmore was driving under the influence of alcohol. Detective Fillmore was arrested and taken to the Santa Clarita station for booking. On the floorboard of his vehicle, deputies located 5 empty whiskey bottles of varying sizes. While at the station, Detective Fillmore was uncooperative in providing a breath sample, despite being given 5 opportunities to do so. Detective Fillmore told the arresting deputy he would only provide a blood sample with a court order. Deputies sought a search warrant and transported Detective Fillmore to the Henry Mayo Hospital to obtain a sample. Nearly 2.5 hours after the stop, a blood sample was obtained via search warrant. The sample resulted in a blood alcohol concentration of 0.12%, which was above the legal limit of 0.08%. Detective Fillmore pled guilty to 1 misdemeanor count of driving a vehicle with a blood alcohol content of 0.08 or greater. In that plea deal, Detective Fillmore was ordered to complete 3 years of summary probation. His driver's license was suspended, and he was fined $390. Detective Fillmore was also ordered to complete a 6-month alcohol education program. The Los Angeles Police Department suspended Detective Fillmore for 10 days, and in August of 2017, he signed a settlement agreement with the Los Angeles Police Department, expressly stating he would abstain from using alcohol for a period of 4 years. In the settlement agreement, Detective Fillmore agreed to submit to alcohol testing for the next 4 years at the request of a supervisor up to 5 times a month. He also agreed to submit to an evaluation and treatment for substance abuse by LAPD's Behavioral Sciences Services Division within 1 week of signing the settlement agreement, as well as attend and participate in said treatment. Detective Fillmore also agreed to allow the LAPD Behavioral Sciences Services Division to share information about his progress and participation in said services with LAPD's internal affairs investigators and provide proof of said treatment as requested to his command staff. Of note, this was in addition to the court-ordered DUI classes that Detective Fillmore had to attend as a result of that conviction. In his settlement agreement, Detective Fillmore admitted to trying to use his police identification to influence investigating officers during their DUI investigation and gain preferential treatment. 4 years and a few months later, on April 30th, 2022, Mr. Fillmore was off duty and driving an unmarked LAPD detective vehicle. While driving southbound on Circle J Ranch Road at a high rate of speed, Detective Fillmore was involved in a vehicle accident. The area in which Mr. Fillmore crashed was a 25-mile-per-hour residential area. Detective Fillmore's police vehicle collided with the rear of a parked vehicle, causing that vehicle to collide with the vehicle in front of it. Though his rate of speed at the time of the crash was not determined, Detective Fillmore's unmarked police vehicle was totaled, and the 2 parked cars received major damage. Detective Fillmore was pinned in the vehicle and sustained a broken wrist, which ultimately required surgery, Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputies responded to the hospital and determined Detective Fillmore had been driving his unmarked police vehicle while under the influence of alcohol. A blood sample was taken around 2 hours and 45 minutes after the vehicle accident. Detective Fillmore was found to have a blood alcohol content of 0.18%. Again, this is well above the legal limit of 0.08. Detective Fillmore admitted to the deputy he had been the driver and sole occupant of the vehicle. He admitted he had been driving at a high rate of speed, and he admitted he had been drinking prior to driving. In March of last year, Detective Fillmore was relieved of duty by the Los Angeles Police Department. Excuse me. Detective Fillmore still shows to be employed by the Los Angeles Police Department and has been directed to a Board of Rights, which is scheduled for next month. Detective Fillmore has had no peace officer powers since he was relieved of duty last March. In April of last year, Detective Fillmore pled no contest to his second misdemeanor charge of driving under the influence of alcohol with a blood alcohol concentration of 0.08% or greater. He received 5 years summary probation, 15 days in jail, and a fine of $500 or 4 additional days in jail. Detective Fillmore was also ordered to complete an 18-month alcohol education program. Detective Fillmore's actions have resulted in the destruction of city-owned property, destruction of private property, and caused him to receive a serious injury. He's been convicted of driving under the influence twice while being employed as a detective for the Los Angeles Police Department. The facts I've just relayed support the division's finding that Detective James Fillmore was involved in serious misconduct, specifically acts that violate the law that are sufficiently egregious to be inconsistent with a peace officer's obligation to uphold the law and respect the rights of the public. For purposes of the division's analysis, clear and convincing evidence means evidence of a charge is clear and convincing so long as there is a high probability that the charge is true. The evidence need not establish a fact beyond a reasonable doubt. In this hearing, like the last, I'd like to take one moment to make a quick correction to the record. In the document I drafted called the Investigative Summary of Findings, there's a typo on the date of Detective Fillmore's first DUI. In 2 locations in that report, it lists the date as July 10th, 2016. That date should be February 27th, 2016. So following my presentation to the board and as documented in the transcripts before you, members of the board raised questions which prompted discussion between the parties present. Mr. Fillmore's attorney provided public comment. The board then went into closed session. When the board returned into open session, 5 board members voted to revoke Detective Fillmore's certification, 3 board members against revocation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yes,
Barcelona.
Pardon me. Oh, when he had his second DUI, did he have any type of counseling or medical treatments in between any of that?
According to the record,
I got the evidence and I read through it, but I didn't see any of that.
he did have some court-ordered counseling and alcohol programs that were part of that.
So he had an opportunity at that time, and he still violated.
And Commissioner Barcelona, I'd also like to point your attention to the settlement agreement. As part of the settlement agreement, he was required to undergo substance abuse counseling with the county's, I believe it's called Behavioral Science Department. And he was supposed to do that and have IA actually have access to those records. So that was in addition to the court-ordered alcohol treatment program he was supposed to be doing.
Was there something in there about he had to submit to testing for a period of like 4 years or something
Yes.
like that? Did they do the testing during those years? Do you know?
We do not have those records.
Commissioner Braun, is his disciplinary action with the Los Angeles Police Department still pending?
So he has been relieved of duty and been sent to Board of Rights. So that Board of Rights is scheduled for next month.
Okay, and for those who aren't familiar with LAPD jargon, a Board of Rights is the final disciplinary hearing before, retired LAPD, a panel that will determine his fate, and that goes to the chief of police to can either concur or go lower than that, but cannot go higher than what the Board of Rights. So he has not had his final disciplinary with his agency.
That is correct.
Okay.
And just a follow-up to that.
Gordon?
With that, that means he hasn't actually had a full evidentiary hearing with LAPD at this point, because that would happen within his Board of Rights.
Questions? Members of the public here who would wish to address the commission regarding this case? In this case. Attorney? Welcome.
Hi, I'm Leslie Wilcox. I'm one of the panel attorneys for the Los Angeles Police Protective League, and I represent Detective Fillmore. My public comment would be, as at the last hearing, that my request is to continue this hearing because the final disposition has not been adjudicated for Detective Fillmore. As the commissioners who are already educated on that process indicated, it is an actual hearing where you can cross-examine, and it is a full evidentiary hearing. And what Post is relying on at the moment is just a summary of an investigation, which has not been tested in any sort of administrative appeal. Most importantly is the expectation, I believe, that all law enforcement has that Post will do what it says it's going to do, and originally indicated that discipline by Post or revocation or suspension would happen after the final discipline of an agency, and that is not occurring in this case. So that is my biggest issue with the current status of this particular case by Post, is that Post is acting prior to the final discipline. I recognize that Post at any level is not bound by the Board of Rights decision, but I do believe that having a full administrative appeal could provide the commission with more information about that once that final decision is made. As you may or may not know, the board's right, usually a pretty detailed rationale for their decision, both on the findings as well as the penalty that could provide this commission with more insight about what is an appropriate discipline for this particular case. I do want this board to know, which I'm assuming that you do know based on the documents that you have, that he went straight to an inpatient rehab facility from the hospital as a result of this 2022 DUI, and he stayed for 65 days, and he's been sober since then. That's almost 2 years at this point. I would also just like to note that the 2017 settlement agreement specifically states that it's not an admission by the officer, so he was not admitting that he had used his identification to influence the arresting agency. And Detective Fillmore also is currently specifically disputing whether or not he had authorization for the unmarked city car that he was in while he was off duty for this 2022 DUI. The only other point I'd like to make is I'm not trying to argue, and I know that this is not the place for that, but I'm also not trying to argue that there is not sufficient evidence to show that a DUI occurred. That is not the position at all. It's whether or not this second DUI with these particular circumstances surrounding Detective Fillmore's personal life, as well as the hard work that he has done since then, is not sufficient to constitute serious misconduct for the purposes of SB2. Thank you.
Mr. Brazil.
Counselor, thank you. For those of us not familiar with the Board of Rights, but other processes, is the detective given an intent letter from LAPD on proposed discipline before he goes to the Board of Rights, so he knows what LAPD intends to do with him?
Are you sheriff?
No.
Oh, because they have an LOI, a letter of intent. So it's like that. Yes.
Oh,
they
no,
are.
I work for a PD, used to work for a PD. We letter of intent, but we didn't have a board.
All kinds of different names for them. Notice of proposed discipline. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what was the letter of intent?
Termination.
Information. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And then I have,
Question?
I'm sorry. I have a question for a lawyer when we're done. Or-
When is the scheduled? His scheduled Board of Rights?
I believe the first day is April 1st.
Questions?
Mr. Chair, if I may respond to Ms. Wilcox's comment.
Woolley,
when I
please.
have a moment. Thank you. I would like to first respond to the Ms. Wilcox comments about the omission not being an omission in the settlement agreement. It actually says in paragraph 1, right before paragraph 1, it says, now therefore, the city and Fillmore, in consideration of the mutual covenants within, agree as follows. Count 2, on or about February 27th, 2016, you, referring to Fillmore, while off duty, inappropriately attempted to use your position as a police officer to receive preferential treatment. As for Ms. Wilcox's comment about reliance on post waiting until a disposition is finished, she's referring to language in Penal Code Section 13510.8. That's language that allows post to toll its investigation pending the final disposition of an agency's investigation. It does not, however, create any form of reliance for an officer, and it should not. Ms. Wilcox did refer in the board hearing to some language in post FAQs that she misinterpreted as creating a sense of reliance. But post investigation is based in part off the fact that Mr. Fillmore did in fact admit in a criminal proceeding where the burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt to driving under the influence. I would like to remind the commission that we are moving forward with a serious misconduct for acts that violate the law. We are not moving forward on the fact that he has been terminated from his employment on that. It's the fact that he is actually violated the law in two separate occasions, and particularly in the most recent one, the act was quite egregious. And as for the fact that Ms. Wilcox wants a continuance because this has not been finally adjudicated, I would like to remind the commission that if we do move forward past this point, Mr. Fillmore will have a final or full adjudication before an administrative law judge, where the burden of proof will be higher than at the Board of Rights hearing because it will be a clear and convincing standard versus preponderance of the evidence. Thank you.
Ms. White. Additional comments, Commissioner Brazil.
I had a question for our legal counsel. If the commission moves forward with a revocation hearing from ALJ, any evidence that from the Board of Rights, what's it called?
Yes.
From the Board of Rights, is that submitted as well to the ALJ for consideration if they choose?
The information that's submitted in front of the ALJ is based on the division's investigation, the packet that you have in front of you right now. So no would be the answer.
Is there any additional information that so if we ask staff to go back and look at certain things in evidence, or maybe they aren't evidence we just aren't made aware of, would that information then be presented to the ALJ?
In general, the commission has the power to instruct division to investigate things that are outside the ISF, the investigation. Yes. So yes.
Then that package would be presented.
Right. And I think there's kind of a distinction to be made here in that, there's a statutory authority for what the commission is doing that's independent than what's going to be found in front of the Board of Rights hearing, right? So you have independent basis for your conduct. But is that clear?
Yeah, it is. And then kind of a back end question to it. If in this case, the respondent's counsel wanted to submit to the ALJ evidence of the Board of Rights, would they be able to do that?
They have the opportunity to provide any evidence that they find mitigating, right? It's a due process opportunity for them at the administrative level. So that's where that comes from. So yes.
One last question. I'm that annoying guy. You should know that by now. How far out would you reasonably expect that if this commission moved forward, that a hearing would be heard by an ALJ?
Had not anticipated that question.
Oh, no, that's right. That's I'm that guy. I told you.
I don't have that answer for you, but I can find it. I can find it for you.
I'm highly unlikely that it would be done before, that our paperwork could be done. It would be like before his Board of Rights hearing.
I think that's very unlikely.
Okay.
I think that's very unlikely,
That's
right?
kind of where I was getting with this. Thank you. Thank you.
Ms. Del Munoz was searching for a microphone.
Phil Donahue.
Yeah.
So in answer to your question, we've been working with the administrative law judges or the Office of Administrative Hearings, and we anticipate it's probably going to be within 4 months as what they're looking at in terms of scheduling.
Chairman Long, if I may also be heard.
Ms. Williams, please.
Thank you. Mike's on. As for the ALJ hearing, the division will also have some opportunity to further develop its evidence. If we did have further evidence to develop at the ALJ hearing, it will be a full evidentiary hearing. So it's not just what's in the ISF. We will be able to perform a little bit of discovery. It's not like a full criminal hearing, but we do have some limited discovery procedures. Thank you.
Commissioner Braun, is his post certificate currently in temporary suspension or no?
It is not currently.
Thank you.
If I may add, I don't believe that thank you, Commissioner Long or Chair Long. We're not allowed to, obviously, because he's still employed. The only time that we can take some kind of action is if they've been charged with a crime, if they've resigned in lieu of, or they've retired in lieu of. So there's no action that we can take against his certificates at this point.
Comments?
Are we
Mr.
at-
Brazil?
Yeah, I would, if questions are done, I would like to move to closed session for deliberation.
There was a question, Commissioner Braun?
I second that.
Okay,
May I just make one more statement that I wanted to correct?
please, Ms. Wilcox.
Thank you. On the settlement agreement, it says, whereas the parties agree that this agreement regarding proposed discipline is not an admission by either party to any unlawful or wrongful acts by themselves, their agents or representatives. I just wanted to clarify that point.
Thank you for the clarification at this time. Then we will adjourn into closed session. We have to move outside this room. We will go upstairs for deliberations on the case. So we will all exit the room and be back for a regular session shortly. Someone will tell us where we're going. All right, it was a productive conversation in closed session. The will of the committee, is there a motion in the case? I gotta get my case number in the Fillmore case.
Chair, I have a
Post
motion.
2303691, is there a motion?
Chair, I have a motion.
Mr. Brazil,
That we have counsel, direct counsel to work with the division to explore a settlement based on the goals identified in closed session and report back to the commission at our next commission meeting.
is there a second?
Second.
Second, Gordon. Discussion of any kind? We've had a lot of discussion. Any discussion, any additional comments? Mr. Knapp, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Barcelona,
Yes.
Commissioner Braun,
Yes.
Commissioner Brazil,
Yes.
Commissioner Cooper, Commissioner Yule, Commissioner Gordon,
Yes.
Commissioner Long,
Yes.
Commissioner Lopez,
Yes.
Commissioner Moon,
Yes.
Commissioner Nieto,
Yes.
and Commissioner Rodriguez.
Yes.
I believe the motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Mr. Executive Director.
Yes. Mr. Chair, since this is the first time, and maybe I'm speaking out of turn here, but how do we find out what those conditions are that you discussed in closed session? So we know what to put together.
We go ahead, Rick, but we've essentially instructed council to work with the division
The council knows the goals and
with
since it's,
direction.
Okay,
since it's a settlement negotiation, not to be discussed in open forum.
got it. Okay.
Specified
So we'll get
criteria
it
and
from
so-
Chris.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Council has the
Yep.
goals.
Okay, thank you.
All right, the second case, post 2308479, Justin Raymond Ramirez, who at the time of the events in question was employed by the Orange County Sheriff's Department. And I'll call upon post law enforcement consultant Trevor Shields, professional conduct Southern Bureau, and Carrie Woolley, the Attorney Legal Affairs Bureau, to provide a report on the Ramirez case. Thank you, Mr. Shields. Ms. Woolley.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Trevor Shields. I'm a law enforcement consultant assigned to the Professional Conduct Southern Bureau. I'm here with respect to the case of Post versus Deputy Justin Ramirez of the Orange County Sheriff's Department. Seated next to me, you guys have all met Carrie Woolley, Post Legal Counsel. In this case, the division found reasonable grounds to believe Deputy Ramirez engaged in serious misconduct in violation of Penal Code Section 13-510-8B6, alleging Deputy Ramirez committed acts that violate the law, specifically repeatedly showing harmful matter to minor children. As set forth in the investigative summary and findings, the division recommends the revocation of Deputy Ramirez's post certification. In accordance with the requirements of Senate Bill 2 and as required by Penal Code Section 13-510.85A4, this matter was heard by the Peace Officer Standards Accountability Advisory Board on December 14th of 2023. Following the conclusion of that hearing, the board voted to recommend revocation of Deputy Ramirez's certification. The division asked you to adopt that recommendation today. As required by Penal Code Section 13-510.85A5, the record of that proceeding is before you, which includes the agenda and attachments from the meeting, transcript of the relevant portions of the hearing, and the recommendation of the board. The law requires your review to be that of that record before the board, which is before you and which you have had an opportunity to review. As the record shows, I presented the case before the board as follows. On September 2nd, 2022, Deputy Ramirez was on campus at Trabuco High School in Mission Viejo as a school resource officer during the freshman lunch period. Deputy Ramirez was in full uniform, seated in a patrol vehicle when he was approached by several freshman students. These students asked him questions about events that he had seen on his job as a deputy sheriff. Instead of using this student interaction as a positive teaching moment and providing an age-appropriate response, Deputy Ramirez used very poor judgment and utilized his personal cellular phone to show the group of 14-year-old female students 2 videos and 2 photos containing explicit, graphic, sexual, and violent content, as well as illicit drug use. Deputy Ramirez repeated the act, showing the same videos and photos a few minutes later to a new group of freshman female students. Those students came over to him after hearing about the videos and photos from the first group of students. Each student had a different reaction to being shown these images. Most students, when they were interviewed, stated they were uncomfortable, and some were shocked at the content that they were viewing. During the Orange County Sheriff's investigation, Deputy Ramirez resigned from the Sheriff's Department prior to his administrative interview and did not provide them a statement. The Orange County District Attorney's Office filed 1 misdemeanor charge of 313.1A of the California Penal Code, which is distributing harmful matter to a minor. On April 25th of 2023, Deputy Ramirez appeared in the Orange County Superior Court on 1 misdemeanor count of California Penal Code 313.1A. Despite opposition from the Orange County District Attorney's Office, the court granted Deputy Ramirez misdemeanor pretrial diversion. As a part of that agreement, Deputy Ramirez agreed to commit no new crimes, perform 40 hours of community service, complete sensitivity training, comply with the stay-away order, and pay a diversion restitution fee. Deputy Ramirez's actions were egregious and repeated. They were inconsistent with his obligation as a peace officer to uphold the law and respect the rights of members of the public. Deputy Ramirez not only violated the penal code, but showed a lack of judgment and disregard for his assignment as a deputy and as a school resource officer. Deputy Ramirez should have been acting as a role model for these students, not exposing them to explicit, graphic, and violent material. Based on the facts of this case, as described here and in the investigative summary and findings, there is clear and convincing evidence that Deputy Ramirez committed acts that violated the law, as defined in Penal Code Section 13510.8B6. Therefore, the recommendation is that Deputy Ramirez's peace officer certification be revoked. Following my presentation to the board, and as documented in the transcripts before you, the following public comments were made by Deputy Ramirez's representative, Robert Baumann. Deputy Ramirez, point number one was Deputy Ramirez was not provided an opportunity to provide a statement to the division. Point number two was on page 3 of the investigative summary and findings. It states Deputy Ramirez pled guilty in Orange County Superior Court. This is inaccurate as he received pretrial diversion. Members of the board raised questions related to the following manners, which prompt discussion between the parties present. Deputy Ramirez was dispatched to the residence of student number 1 a couple of days after the incident. During that initial contact with the reporting party, was Deputy Ramirez alone with student number 1 when he interviewed her? Their second point was, how did Deputy Ramirez come to get the photos and videos on his personal cell phone? Is it legal for him to possess them? Public comments continued with Orange County Deputy District Attorney Matthew Bradbury. Mr. Bradbury was the Deputy District Attorney who filed criminal charges against Deputy Ramirez and wrote the opposition to the court against the pretrial diversion. The DA also filed a motion to reconsider, which was denied. The board went into closed session. When the board returned to open session, it voted unanimously to recommend the revocation of Deputy Ramirez certification. If the commission has any questions, Harry and I would be happy to answer them at this time.
See no questions, no comments? Is there a member of the public, any member of the public who would like to address the commission regarding this item? Please come forward. Identify yourself. Thank you. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matthew Bradbury, and I am a Deputy District Attorney with the Orange County DA's office. I want to thank you all for taking the time to hear these cases. My office cares a lot about police misconduct or allegations of police misconduct, so my office has ensured that I be here. I was also in Sacramento in December, and I met some of you, some of the post members that day. Mr. Shields did a really good job of already explaining everything that I think you need to know. In December, there were some questions about the procedural posture of the criminal case. So we did file misdemeanor criminal charges against Mr. Ramirez. We did not feel that there was a felony, although some suggested there could be a felony based on him showing a very explicitly sexual video. But we went with a misdemeanor, and a judge in one of our courthouses, over our very strong objection, did allow Mr. Ramirez to go into diversion. So if anyone has questions about that, I can answer those. But it is my office's position, along with Mr. Shields' position, et cetera, that this was serious misconduct. These were 14-year-old freshman girls who essentially just, in my view, were just trying to, get an innocuous response from a police officer. Hey, what's it like doing your job? And Mr. Ramirez took it in a direction that it's a complete lapse of judgment, basically showed no judgment whatsoever. to show these videos, to show these photographs. Photographs that in our view were certainly obtained from crime scenes. That in and of itself nowadays would be a crime, known as the Kobe law. Some of you are probably familiar with that. This barely predated that becoming a crime, so that's why we didn't have those charges as well. But photos from crime scenes, in addition to videos that we're not even sure where he got the videos from, probably strange corners of the internet. We're not sure, but the point stands that this was, in our view, serious misconduct. Like I said, the criminal case is in diversion. I don't have an update as to how Mr. Ramirez is doing in his diversion. I hope he's doing well for his sake. We will have a check-in on that on April 24th, but that's where the criminal case stands. So I'll submit on that unless anyone has questions about the criminal case. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Bradbury? Mr. Bradbury, thank you very much for taking the time to be here today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any comments or questions? Is there a motion to adopt the board's recommendation for revocation and refer that recommendation for an evidentiary hearing before an ALJ?
Barcelona, I'll make.
Is there a second?
Rodriguez, second.
Moved and seconded. Mr. Knapp, please call the roll.
Commissioner Barcelona,
Yes.
Commissioner Braun,
Yes.
Commissioner Cooper. Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Brazil. Commissioner Cooper. Commissioner Yule. Commissioner Gordon,
Yes.
Commissioner Long,
Yes.
Commissioner Lopez, Commissioner Moon,
Yes.
Commissioner Nieto,
Yes.
Commissioner Rodriguez. It's unanimous.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Knapp. Commissioners, is there anything else? Any questions or comments? We are at the end of the agenda. Mr. Director, questions or any comments?
No, sir.
Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
Moved.
Is there a second? Second. Is there objection to unanimous consent? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.